Hi guys, and welcome to the Gentle History podcast. Tonight you arrive just a little too late. A thin layer of ash drifts slowly through the air, settling softly on your shoulders, light as snow but warmer than it should be. You brush it away without thinking, only to notice how quiet everything is. No footsteps, no distant voices, not even the sound of wind. Just a stillness that feels unnatural. You take a slow breath and there is a faint, bitter taste in the air. It lingers longer than expected. You pause, because something here does not quite make sense. And the more you notice, the clearer it becomes. If you were truly standing here, you would not have time to understand it. You probably would not survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, flow straight into the story. You stand for a moment in the dark and let your eyes adjust, though there is almost nothing for them to do. The room around you is not the sort of room that reveals itself all at once. It is built from rough logs, packed in places with clay and scraps of whatever could be pressed into the cracks, and it holds the cold with a kind of stubborn honesty. No one here has wasted money or effort making things pretty. Pretty does not keep the wind out. Pretty does not stretch flour. Pretty does not stop January from behaving like a personal insult. So this is where you wake. Not in comfort exactly, but in survival. The room is small enough that if you speak softly, the walls seem to keep your voice close. Your bed, if you are being generous, is a frame with rope support and a mattress stuffed with straw corn husks. Feathers, if you are lucky, or some creative combination of all three if fortune has been flirting with the household. The blanket over you is heavy rough and faintly damp at the edges from the cold that gathers in the night. You can smell wool smoke, old wood, a trace of tallow, and that peculiar winter scent of a room where several people have breathed the same dark air for hours, and you have not woken because you feel refreshed. No, you have woken because frontier people in 1812 often rise before dawn not out of virtue, though they might later describe it that way, but because fire dies, chores wait, and daylight is too valuable to waste. That is the plain historical fact of it. In a world without electric light, the sun is not just scenery. It is schedule, budget, and supervisor. You work when it appears, and you prepare for it before it does. So here you are, still half tangled in sleep, your nose cold, your breath visible in the dark. There is a moment just before you move when you try to bargain with the morning. It's a very old human instinct, and one of the few things about this room that feels comfortingly modern. Maybe you could stay under the blanket another minute. Maybe whoever is supposed to stir the embers will do it without you. Maybe the rooster is confused. Maybe dawn has been cancelled. An ambitious theory, that last one. Sadly, the frontier is not famous for honouring personal boundaries. You listen. From somewhere close by comes the tiny rustle of another sleeper turning in bed. A child, perhaps, or your spouse or some cousin staying over, because roads are poor, houses are few, and privacy is a luxury for people with better walls. Somewhere overhead, the timber gives a soft pop. The house settles or complains. Frontier homes do a great deal of both. Your fingers emerge from the blanket and regret everything immediately. The air bites. It does not merely feel cold. It feels active, as if it has intentions. You touch the sheet and find it chilled. You brush the wall beside the bed, and the log feels like stone left in a river of ice. The ashes in the hearth still breathe the faintest smell of yesterday's fire, but no real heat reaches you now. That warmth is memory. The room has gone back to what the wilderness wanted it to be. You picture the outside almost without wanting to. Black trees, hard ground, frost whitening the earth like sifted flour. A bucket with a skim of ice, maybe deeper than a skim. A sky not yet light, but thinning somewhere behind the ridgeline. In many parts of the American frontier during the War of 1812 settlements remained sparse roads, crude, and houses simple enough that winter cold could work its way indoors no matter how hard people fought it. Even a good cabin was less a fortress than a negotiation. And this room, for all its rough discomfort, is still the result of real labour and real hope. That part matters, because when you wake here before dawn in freezing darkness, you're not simply uncomfortable. You're inside a dream people built with axes, blisters, and a suspicious amount of optimism. A frontier cabin is not just shelter, it is a statement. It says someone came here, cleared a land-cut timber, raised walls, patched gaps, hauled water-stacked fuel, and decided that this place, despite all evidence to the contrary, could be made into home. Historians still argue whether the typical frontier household was driven more by hunger for land, family necessity, or sheer lack of alternatives, and perhaps the truest answer is the least dramatic one. Usually it was several things at once. Very little in daily life fits neatly into one motive, especially when your breakfast depends on not freezing before sunrise. Your eyes settle on the shape of the hearth. The whole room leans emotionally toward it. Every object seems ranged in relation to fire as if the cabin itself knows what matters. A pot, a stool, a peg with clothes hanging stiffly nearby, shoes placed where someone can find them by habit, not sight. The faint glimmer of a metal hook. Everything waits in stillness but not peacefully, more like a stage before the actor's return. And there is another sensation now, not fear exactly, awareness. You realise how vulnerable this room is, how thin the line is between ordinary discomfort and genuine danger. If the woodpile runs low, if illness comes, if the weather worsens, if a chimney sparks, if a child wakes with fever, if a cow is gone at first light, the whole day bends around that problem. There is no warm button to press, no neat row of medicine bottles, no insulated jacket zipped to the chin. There is only what has been prepared, what can be mended, what can be endured. People sometimes tucked heated stones into beds before sleep to make them less brutal in winter, which sounds charming until you remember that every comfort here arrives, carrying a slight possibility of disaster. Too hot and you scorch bedding. Too cool and you're cuddling a very disappointing rock. Frontier life really does have a gift for taking simple ideas and adding consequences. You shift again and hear the faint crackle of straw beneath the mattress tick. Outside, perhaps far off, perhaps very near, something moves in the dark. Not dramatically, just enough to remind you that the world beyond the walls is not empty. Fox-deer wind stirred through bare branches, a horse shifting weight in some lean shelter. The frontier does not sleep deeply. It dozes with one eye open. And now, at last, you know what waking here feels like. It feels like emerging into a room that has gone cold long before your courage has warmed up. It feels like smoke caught in the rafters and frost nibbling the edge of every thought. It feels like sharing your first breath of the day with sleeping family rough blankets, old timber and the quiet pressure of work already waiting. It feels lonely and crowded at once, crude but strangely intimate, hard but not empty. You draw the blanket closer one final time, listening to the breath of the others staring at the low dark shape of the hearth, knowing that in another moment you will have to leave the little island of warmth your body has made during the night and put your feet into a world that has no sympathy for hesitation. And that perhaps is the first frontier lesson of the morning. The day does not begin when you are ready. It begins when the cold says so. You hesitate longer than you mean to. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone would write songs about. Just a quiet pause stretched thin while your body negotiates with the idea of movement. The blanket has trapped what little warmth you made through the night, and it feels almost like a fragile promise. Leave and that warmth disappears instantly. Stay and, well, nothing gets done. Your breath curls faintly in front of your face, barely visible in the dimness. You test the air again with your fingers slower this time, as if easing into bad news might make it kinder. It doesn't. The cold is steady, patient, and entirely unimpressed with your hesitation. You shift your legs. The moment your feet slide out from under the blanket, the cold rushes in like an eager guest who's been waiting all night at the door. The sensation is immediate, sharp, almost personal. Your skin tightens. Your toes curl instinctively, searching for heat that is no longer there. You consider retreat. Honestly, it's a compelling argument. But the longer you wait, the worse it gets. So you commit. Your feet touch the floor. It is not just cold. It is deeply convincingly cold, the kind that feels as though it has been stored for generations in the earth beneath the cabin. The wooden boards, roughly planed and uneven in places, offer no comfort. They hold the night's chill without apology. You inhale sharply through your nose, then regret that as well, because the air feels just as biting on the inside. Somewhere beside you, someone exhales heavily and shifts beneath their own blanket. Perhaps they are awake. Perhaps they are pretending not to be. There is a quiet, unspoken understanding in rooms like this: whoever rises first tends the fire. It is less a rule than a habit shaped by necessity. And today, apparently, that someone is you. You sit upright, pulling the blanket round your shoulders for one last moment of borrowed warmth. It clings to you slightly, the wool rough against your skin carrying the faint smell of smoke and long use. You rub your arms through it, trying to coax life back into your muscles. The air brushes your neck and you shiver again. You glance toward the hearth. In the near dark, it is little more than a shadow, a low shape that anchors the room. But you know what waits there. Ashes. Perhaps embers if you're fortunate. Perhaps nothing at all if luck has stepped outside for the night. And everything depends on that. A small, almost absurd thought crosses your mind: how something as simple as a glowing coal can decide whether your morning begins gently or miserably. On the frontier, survival often rests on these tiny margins. Not grand victories, not heroic moments. Just whether the fire lives or dies between one night and the next. There were households that kept embers alive for days, even weeks, carefully banking them under ash so they could be revived each morning. It saved time, effort, and more importantly, the risk of failing to start a fire from scratch in damp or bitter conditions. That is a well-established detail of early American life, the sort of quiet knowledge passed along not in books but in habit and tired repetition. You slide your feet slowly across the floor, testing each step. The boards creak softly beneath your weight. The sound is not loud, but in this silence it feels enormous, as if the room itself is announcing your movement. You pause, listening again. No one complains. No one stirs fully. Just the soft rhythm of sleeping breath, the occasional rustle of cloth, and the faint whisper of wind slipping through the smallest gaps in the walls. Those gaps matter. Even well-built cabins in 1812 were rarely sealed tight. Chink in the material stuffed between logs might be clay moss or scraps of fibre, and over time it shifts cracks or falls away, which means the outside world always finds a way in. Not dramatically, not in gusts, just in thin, persistent threads of cold that weave themselves into the room. You feel one now along your ankle. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders and continue. The hearth grows clearer as your eyes adjust. A shallow bed of ash pale even in the darkness, with darker shapes beneath that might be coals, or might not. There is always that uncertainty. You crouch slowly, joints stiff from the cold, and extend your hand toward the ashes. You stop just short of touching them. There is a particular kind of caution here. You do not want to smother a surviving ember by careless movement, nor do you want to waste time hoping for one that does not exist. You hover your hand, close feeling for the faintest suggestion of warmth. At first nothing, then barely something, a whisper of heat, so faint you might imagine it if you were desperate enough, which to be fair you are. You lean closer, squinting as if sight might confirm what touch cannot quite trust. You stir the ash gently with your fingers, careful, deliberate. A small glow answers you, not bright, not impressive, but real. And you feel something like relief spread through you, subtle but unmistakable. It is not joy, that would be too extravagant. But it is enough to continue, enough to build from. You sit back slightly, letting out a slow breath. Somewhere in the wider world, wars are being planned, treaties, argued, ships launched. The War of 1812 has already begun shaping lives far beyond this room. Trade disrupted, supplies, uncertain rumours travelling faster than facts. Yet here in this moment, the outcome of your morning depends not on generals or governments, but on this small, stubborn ember refusing to go out. There is something grounding in that. Of course not. Everything about frontier life is as straightforward as it seems. There are odd little beliefs tucked into daily routines. Some people, for instance, held that a fire going out overnight could be a sign of bad luck, or even a warning of illness to come. Not a universal belief, certainly, but one of those quiet superstitions that linger around practical tasks just in case the world is listening. Historians still debate how much such beliefs truly shaped behaviour versus simply offering comfort after the fact. Did people genuinely fear the omen, or did they just prefer not to test it? The line between caution and superstition is, as always, a little blurry. You brush a bit more ash aside. The glow strengthens slightly, responding to the attention. It feels almost alive, as though it has been waiting for you to notice it. You glance around for kindling small pieces of wood scrap saved carefully for this exact moment. Nothing is wasted here. Not wood, not time, not effort. Your fingers are numb now, but moving helps. Activity builds heat slowly, reluctantly. Your body begins to accept the morning, even if it doesn't approve of it. Behind you, someone murmurs in their sleep. You pause again, listening. The room is still mostly at rest, caught in that fragile space between night and day. You are the first to cross that boundary. The first to bring movement back into the space. No pressure. You gather a few thin sticks, arranging them gently over the ember, giving it something to catch, something to grow into. It is a delicate process, less about force and more about patience. Too much too quickly and the ember suffocates. Too little and it fades. A balance. You lean closer and blow softly. The ember brightens. A thread of smoke curls upward, thin and hesitant. It carries that familiar scent wood ash, the beginning of warmth. You watch it carefully adjusting the kindling, feeding it just enough. This is how the day starts, not with light, not with certainty, but with a small fragile glow in the dark and the quiet determination to turn it into something that can carry you through the cold. The ember answers you, but only just. You lean closer, your breath slow and measured, as if even your impatience might frighten it away. The small glow pulses faintly beneath the ash, like something deciding whether it still belongs in this world. You've seen this before, or rather, you are beginning to understand it. Fire here is not a switch, it is a negotiation. You nudge a sliver of kindling into place. Your fingers feel clumsy, thick with cold. The wood itself is dry enough, thankfully. That matters more than you might expect. Damp kindling is a quiet enemy, the kind that wastes your time while pretending to cooperate. Many frontier households learned the hard way to keep a store of dry splints tucked near the hearth, or hanging overhead where rising warmth could preserve them. A simple habit, but one that saves mornings like this from turning into slow, smoky failure. You lower your face again and blow. Not hard, never hard. A gentle stream of breath, steady and patient. The ember responds with a soft brightening, and for a moment you feel something close to triumph. Then it dims again, as if reconsidering. You pause. There is a rhythm to this. You're starting to feel it. Feed, wait, breathe, watch, adjust, listen. It is almost calming in a strange way. The world outside may be cold and indifferent, but here in this small circle of ash and effort you have a kind of influence. A faint crackle breaks the silence. You freeze listening. Then it comes again, soft, delicate, but unmistakable. The smallest twig is caught. Not fully, not yet, but enough to announce its intention. A thin ribbon of smoke rises, curling toward the unseen rafters, carrying that sharp, comforting scent of wood beginning to burn. You allow yourself a slow exhale. There it is, the first real sign that the morning can proceed. Behind you the room shifts slightly. Someone coughs a dry, shallow sound and turns beneath their blanket. You do not look back. Not yet. The fire still needs you. It demands attention in these early moments, like a child who will not be ignored until it is certain you mean to stay. You add another small piece of kindling. Too much, and you smother it. Too little, and it fades. The balance is everything. It is almost like cooking, except the consequences arrive faster and with less forgiveness. Your knees press against the cold floor as you crouch and you shift your weight to ease the ache. Already your body's adjusting. The sharp shock of the cold has dulled into something more manageable, not comfortable exactly, but familiar. This is how it begins. The first resistance fades, replaced by quiet acceptance. You blow again gently. The flame appears, small, flickering, fragile as a thought you're not sure you should say out loud. But it is there, licking along the edge of the wood, catching, growing just enough to make the darkness feel slightly less complete. You watch it for a moment longer than necessary. There is something mesmerizing about it. Not just the warmth it promises, but the way it moves alive in a way nothing else in the room quite is. Fire has always held that strange dual nature, comfort and danger in the same breath. And here on the frontier that balance feels especially close. There were in fact occasional reports of entire cabins lost to accidental fires started at dawn, when sleepy hands and dry timber met in unfortunate ways. Chimneys could crack, sparks could leap, and a moment of inattention could undo years of work. It is one of those quiet truths people carried with them, rarely spoken aloud but always understood. You sit back slightly, giving the flame room. It grows cautiously at first, then with a bit more confidence. The kindling begins to catch in earnest now, each small piece contributing its part. The crackling sound deepens, becoming steadier, more assured. The hearth, moments ago a cold shadow, begins to gather purpose again. And with it the room changes, not dramatically, not all at once, but subtly, undeniably. The darkness shifts. The air moves differently. The faintest hint of warmth brushes your hand so slight you might miss it if you were not paying attention. But you are. You reach for a slightly larger piece of wood, testing its weight, its dryness. This is the next step. The transition from fragile beginnings to something that can sustain itself. You place it carefully angled, just so giving the flame space to climb. For a moment nothing happens. Then slowly the edges darken. A faint glow spreads. The fire considers its new offering, then accepts. You nod to yourself, almost unconsciously. This is working. Somewhere outside, a distant sound drifts through the walls. A faint call, perhaps a bird, perhaps something else. It is hard to tell at this hour. The frontier does not announce its inhabitants clearly. It prefers suggestion over certainty. You glance toward the door, though you cannot see it clearly. Beyond it, the world is still mostly dark. Dawn is coming, but it takes its time. There is no rush here. The sun rises when it chooses, not when you are ready. You turn back to the fire. The smoke thickens slightly now, curling upward in lazy spirals. It gathers near the ceiling before finding its way out through the chimney, though not perfectly. A thin haze begins to settle in the room, carrying that familiar, slightly acrid scent that clings to clothes, hair, everything. You'll smell like this all day. Everyone will. It is simply part of living here. There were even accounts of travellers remarking on the constant presence of smoke in frontier homes, noting how it irritated the eyes and lungs, yet became so normal that people barely commented on it. A strange adaptation, perhaps, but then again, humans are very good at getting used to things that would once have seemed unbearable. Historians still argue whether long-term exposure to indoor smoke significantly impacted the health of early settlers, or whether other hardships overshadowed it so completely that it barely registered in contemporary accounts. It is one of those questions where the evidence exists, but the experience is harder to measure. You shift again, easing yourself into a more comfortable crouch. The fire is stable now. Not roaring, not even strong, but steady. Reliable. enough to begin warming the room, enough to justify the effort you have spent coaxing it back to life. Behind you, another sound, softer this time. A whisper of movement, the rustle of fabric, a quiet intake of breath. The others are beginning to wake. You do not turn immediately. There is a small private satisfaction in being the one who brought the fire back. Not pride exactly, just a sense of having nudged the day into motion. You extend your hands toward the flames. The warmth is still faint, but it is real. It settles into your fingers, slowly chasing away the numbness. The contrast is almost startling how something so small can feel so significant after the cold you have just endured. You flex your hands, watching the firelight dance across your skin. This is how mornings begin here. Not with alarms or schedules, but with effort, with patience, with a quiet, persistent refusal to let the cold have the final word. And as the first true flames take hold, you realize something else. You're no longer entirely at the mercy of the room. Not yet, anyway. The fire gathers itself slowly, but with growing confidence, like someone remembering their role after a long pause. You stay close, watching the flame climb along the wood you've given it. It no longer flickers nervously. It holds. It breathes. Each crackle feels steadier, less like a question, and more like an answer. You ease back onto your heels, letting the first honest warmth reach your face. It's subtle at first. A faint loosening in your cheeks, a gentle thaw in your fingers. The air closest to the hearth begins to shift, rising just enough to carry a fragile promise of comfort into the rest of the room. Not enough to call it warm, not even close, but enough to remind you that cold is not permanent. Behind you, the cabin begins to wake in pieces. A blanket rustles. Someone inhales sharply, perhaps startled by the cold as you were moments ago. A child mutters something unintelligible and burrows deeper, resisting the morning with quiet determination. You can almost admire that strategy. It won't work, but it has spirit. You glance back briefly. Shapes are becoming clearer now, not because the sun has arrived, but because the fire has begun to lend its faint glow. The outline of the room emerges, the low ceiling beams darkened with years of smoke. The rough walls uneven and practical, the scattered belongings that fill the space without ever quite organizing it. Everything has a place, though not always an obvious one. The smoke thickens slightly as the fire grows. It drifts upward, then lingers as if unsure where to go. The chimney does its job imperfectly, which is to say, it does its job exactly as expected. A thin veil settles across the upper part of the room, catching the dim light and softening the edges of everything it touches. You blink once, twice. Your eyes adjust. People living in cabins like this often became so accustomed to smoke that it barely registered, unless it grew unusually heavy. Visitors, on the other hand, frequently found it overwhelming, their eyes watering within minutes. It is one of those small but telling differences between those who belong to a place and those who are merely passing through. You reach for another piece of wood. This one is thicker, heavier, a more serious commitment. You place it carefully across the growing flame, angling it so air can still move. The fire responds with a deeper sound, now a more confident crackling that fills the room in a way that silence never quite did. It feels alive, and with that the room feels less like a frozen container and more like a space again occupied, active, inhabited. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders, though now it is more habit than necessity. The warmth from the hearth is beginning to reach you in waves uneven but welcome. Your toes still protest the cold floor, but the urgency has softened. The edge has dulled. Outside something shifts. A faint creak, perhaps, from a nearby tree bending under frost, or the distant movement of an animal. It is impossible to be certain. Sound travels strangely in the early morning, especially when the world is still holding its breath before sunrise. You listen for a moment, then let it go. There is enough to manage here. Another sleeper stirs. This time a voice follows, a low murmur, barely formed words that dissolve before they fully arrive. Someone waking but not yet willing to admit it. You recognize the stage, the slow return to consciousness where the body wakes before the mind agrees. You smile faintly, though no one sees it. You were there moments ago. The fire snaps sharply, drawing your attention back. A small spark leaps upward, then vanishes. You adjust the wood again, nudging it into a more stable position. The flame responds immediately, climbing higher, brighter. Light spreads. Not much. Not enough to banish the darkness entirely, but enough to shape it to give it boundaries. Shadows retreat from the hearth, gathering in the corners instead. The room feels larger now, simply because you can see where it ends. You glance toward the door again. Still dark. Still closed. Beyond it, the frontier waits fields, trees, whatever lies just beyond the edge of memory and effort. But for now, the world is contained within these walls. This room, this fire, this small circle of warmth, pushing back against the cold. It is enough. You shift your weight and sit back more comfortably, extending your hands toward the heat. The sensation is stronger now, no longer a suggestion but a presence. It seeps into your skin slow and steady, easing the stiffness from your fingers. You flex them again. Better. There is a rhythm to this part of the morning, one that does not require thought so much as attention. Add wood. Watch flame. Adjust. Wait. It is almost meditative if meditation involved more splinters and a constant awareness of failure. A faint glow begins to creep along the edges of the room, not from the fire, but from somewhere beyond the walls. The earliest hint of dawn. It does not arrive dramatically. It never does. It simply begins quietly, as if the world has decided to continue without making a fuss about it. You notice it more than see it. A thinning of darkness, a subtle shift in tone. It reminds you that time is moving, whether you feel ready or not. There were mornings like this repeated countless times across the frontier. People rising in darkness, tending fires, preparing for days that would demand far more than comfort ever offered. It was not unusual. It was not remarkable. It was simply how life worked when survival depended on steady effort rather than convenience. And yet each morning carried its own small uncertainties. Would the weather hold? Would the animals be where they should? Would supplies last? Would the day pass without incident? These questions rarely found answers in advance. They were discovered piece by piece as the hours unfolded. You reach for another log larger this time. The fire accepts it with growing confidence, the flames wrapping around its edges, beginning the slow process of transformation. Wood to heat, solid to ash. A quiet exchange that keeps everything moving forward. Behind you a voice finally forms words. Soft, sleep heavy, fires up. You nod, though they may not see it. It is, you reply quietly, your voice rough from the cold air. A pause, then a soft exhale, almost relieved. The kind of sound that says the day can begin now. Not happily, not eagerly, but properly. You understand that. Because the fire is not just warmth. It is permission. Permission to rise, to move, to face what waits beyond the door. Without it, everything slows, hesitates, risks becoming something harder than it needs to be. You glance back at the hearth one more time. The flames are steady now, reliable, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain. They have taken hold, and with them so has the morning. And as the first faint light of dawn continues to gather beyond the walls, you realize something simple but important. You have carried the room from night into day. Not alone perhaps, but first. And that matters more than anyone will say out loud. The fire has settled into itself now, no longer asking for constant reassurance. You feel it behind you as you stand a steady presence at your back like a quiet companion that expects nothing but still makes everything easier. The room is not warm, not in any modern sense, but it has crossed a threshold. The cold no longer feels absolute. It has edges now, boundaries, places where it cannot quite reach, which means it is time. You turn toward the small cluster of belongings that mark your space. Clothing waits there, hanging from a peg, or folded in a way that suggests both care and necessity. Nothing here is decorative. Every piece has a purpose, and most of them have been mended at least once, sometimes many times. You reach for your shirt. The fabric is stiff, not frozen exactly, but close enough to make the distinction feel generous. Linen, most likely, or a rough homespun blend, and it carries the chill of the room with quiet determination. You hesitate for just a second, holding it in your hands, feeling the cold seep into your fingers. Then you pull it on. The shock is immediate. The fabric presses against your skin like something that has no interest in your comfort. Your shoulders tighten. Your breath catches. You exhale slowly through your teeth, adjusting the shirt as it settles against you. Within moments, your body begins the slow work of warming it. But those first few seconds leave an impression. You reach for the next layer. More cloth, more cold, more quiet resistance from your own instincts. But there is no alternative. On the frontier, layering is not fashion. It is survival in manageable increments. Each piece adds a little more insulation, a little more protection, against a world that does not offer it freely. In the early 1800s, most settlers wore multiple layers even indoors during winter shirts, waistcoats, petticoats, shawls, because cabins, despite their best efforts, did little to trap heat evenly. It is one of those grounded realities of the time you dressed for the environment you had not the one you wished for. You step into your trousers, pulling them up with fingers that are still regaining their dexterity. The fabric scratches slightly. Not painfully, just enough to remind you that comfort was not the primary design goal. Durability was. Longevity. The ability to survive repeated wear-rough work and frequent repairs. You adjust the waistband and tie it securely. Behind you, someone else begins the same process. You hear the soft rustle of cloth, the quiet intake of breath that follows contact with cold fabric. A shared experience, though no one comments on it. There is no need. Some things are understood without discussion. You reach for your stockings. They are stiff as well, but less shocking than the shirt. Perhaps your skin is adjusted, or perhaps you're simply expecting it now. You pull them on, carefully smoothing them along your legs, ensuring there are no folds that might rub uncomfortably later. Small details matter when your day involves long hours on your feet. You pause sitting briefly on the edge of the bed. The wood beneath you is still cold, but less so than before. The fire is doing its work, slowly changing the atmosphere of the room. Not dramatically, not generously, but enough. Your shoes wait nearby. You pick one up and turn it in your hands. Leather-worn and creased, shaped by use more than by design. It holds its form, stubbornly resisting your attempts to flex it open. Cold has made it rigid, less forgiving. You slide your foot inside. It takes effort. The leather does not yield easily, and for a moment you wonder if it has shrunk overnight, as though the cold itself has tightened its grip. You push a little harder, wiggling your toes until they find their place. The second shoe follows with similar reluctance. You stand. The floor feels different now, not warm but less hostile. Your shoes create a barrier, thin but effective. You shift your weight, testing your balance, feeling the layers settle around you. Better. Across the room, someone mutters something about the cold. A quiet complaint, half-formed, more reflex than conversation. It fades quickly, replaced by the sounds of movement fabric, shifting feet, finding the floor bodies adjusting to the day. You glance toward them briefly. Shapes in the dim light, still wrapped in shadow but undeniably present. Family, most likely, or close enough to be treated as such. On the frontier, the line between household and extended kin often blurred. Space was shared. Work was shared. Even discomfort was shared, though not always equally. You reach for an outer layer, a coat perhaps, or a thicker garment meant to hold in what little warmth your body can produce. It is heavier than the rest, and when you pull it around your shoulders you feel a small but noticeable difference. Not warmth exactly, but resistance. A slowing of the cold's advance. There were even occasional reports of people sleeping in parts of their daytime clothing during the harshest winters simply to avoid the shock of dressing in freezing air. Not a universal practice, but one that appears in scattered accounts, suggesting that practicality often outweighed comfort in ways that feel both familiar and slightly desperate. You adjust the collar, pulling it closer to your neck. Your breath still shows faintly in the air, but less than before. The fire is beginning to shift the balance, even if only slightly. You take a step toward the hearth. The warmth greets you more clearly now, a soft, steady presence that reaches through your layers and settles against your skin. You hold your hands out again, letting the heat soak in, feeling the stiffness leave your fingers bit by bit. Behind you another voice, clearer this time. Cold One. You nod again. It is. There is a pause, then a soft chuckle. Not amused exactly, more like recognition. The kind of sound people make when they encounter something expected but still unpleasant. You glance toward the door once more. The faint light outside has grown slightly stronger, though it still struggles to define itself. Dawn is approaching, but it's in no hurry to arrive fully. The world remains in that in-between state, neither night nor day, where everything feels suspended. You turn back to the room. Clothed now more or less prepared, you feel the difference immediately. Not comfort, but readiness. A subtle shift from passive endurance to active participation. You're no longer simply reacting to the cold. You're beginning to meet it on more equal terms. That matters, because mornings like this are not about feeling good. They are about getting started. And as you stand there, layers settled, fire steady, the room slowly waking around you, you realize that the hardest part is already behind you. You have left the warmth of the bed. You have faced the cold. You have begun. Everything else in its own way will follow from that. You begin to notice the room in a different way now, not just as something you occupy, but as something that answers back. At first it is subtle, a faint creak in the wall behind you as though the logs themselves are stretching after a long, cold night. Then another sound, softer, almost like a sigh, drifting from the ceiling beams overhead. The entire structure seems to be adjusting, responding to the return of warmth from the hearth. You pause listening. The fire crackles steadily, filling the space between these quieter noises. But beyond that, there is more. Always more. The frontier never offers true silence. It only disguises its sounds until you learn how to hear them. A low whistle threads through the wall. Wind, not strong enough to rattle the door or shake the frame, but persistent. It finds its way through the smallest imperfections, slipping between logs, brushing against your ankles, then disappearing again as if it has changed its mind. You shift your weight, following the sensation. There, just near the corner, a narrow seam where the chinking has worn thin. The cold seeps through like a quiet intruder, unnoticed unless you pay attention. And once you notice, you cannot quite ignore it. You tuck your coat closer. These small drafts were a constant companion in early American cabins. Even well-built homes could not completely seal out winter air, especially after seasons of settling and shifting. It was simply understood that indoors and outdoors were separated more by intention than by perfection. You glance toward the others. They are fully awake now, or close to it. Movements are more deliberate. A blanket is folded. Someone pulls on boots with a soft grunt of effort. Another coughs again, deeper this time, then clears their throat. The sound lingers. It makes you aware of something else, the quality of the air itself. The smoke from the fire, though thinner now, still hangs faintly in the room. It mixes with the cold, the scent of wood, the lingering traces of sleep. You breathe it in without thinking the way everyone here does. There were even peculiar observations recorded by travellers passing through frontier regions, noting that long-time residents seemed almost immune to the irritation of smoke, while newcomers struggled to tolerate it for even short periods. The body, it seems, learns what it must. You turn your attention outward again. Beyond the walls, the sounds grow slightly clearer as the light begins its slow arrival. A distant rustle, perhaps dry leaves disturbed by something unseen. Then a sharper noise, a branch snapping somewhere far enough away to feel safe, but near enough to register. You tilt your head. Was that an animal, most likely? Deer, perhaps. Or something smaller moving quickly through the underbrush. The exact source matters less than the reminder you're not alone here. The wilderness does not wait politely outside. It presses close, listening as much as you are. A rooster calls, not right beside the cabin, but not far either. The sound cuts cleanly through the air, confident and unapologetic. It feels almost theatrical, like an announcement that the morning has officially been acknowledged. You glance toward the door again. The faint grey of dawn has deepened, though it still refuses to become proper light. It lingers in that uncertain state as if deciding whether to commit. Behind you a voice speaks more clearly now. Wind picked up. You nod. Sounds like it. Another pause. Then might be colder today. You consider that. It's a simple observation, but one that carries weight. On the frontier, weather is not background. It is an active participant in every plan, every task, every expectation. A colder day means harder work, slower progress, more careful use of resources. You listen again to the wind slipping through the walls. It has a tone to it, a thin, persistent note that suggests it will not be leaving any time soon. You step closer to the hearth, letting the warmth settle into you again. The fire answers with a sharper crackle, as if pleased by your attention. You adjust one of the logs, nudging it slightly to improve the airflow. The flames respond immediately, rising a little higher, a little brighter. The room shifts again. It is not just the temperature, it is the feeling, the atmosphere, the sense that the space is becoming active, alive with small movements and quiet purpose. You begin to hear the layering of sounds more clearly now, the fire steady and rhythmic, the wind weaving in and out, the occasional murmur of voices still soft, still close to sleep, the faint scuff of boots against the floor, and beneath it all something deeper, the subtle, constant presence of the land itself. Not a sound exactly, but a kind of awareness, a reminder that everything here exists within a much larger world that does not pause simply because you are waking up. There were even moments recorded in scattered diaries where settlers described the land as having a kind of personality, something that could be felt rather than explained. Not in a mystical sense necessarily, but in the way patterns of sound, weather and movement created a presence that was hard to ignore. Some modern historians question how literal those descriptions were meant to be, suggesting they may reflect emotional responses rather than actual beliefs. Others think they hint at a deeper connection between people and environment, one shaped by constant exposure and reliance. You stand quietly for a moment, letting the sound settle around you. It is not peaceful exactly, but it is balanced. Each noise has its place. Each movement fits into the rhythm of the morning. Nothing feels out of order, even if nothing feels particularly comfortable. You take a slow breath. The air is still cold, still carries the faint bite of smoke, but it feels more manageable now. Familiar. Something you can move through rather than something you must endure. Across the room, someone opens the door slightly. Just a crack. Cold air rushes in, immediately sharper than anything that has slipped through the walls. It cuts across the room, brushing against your face, your hands, your thoughts. You flinch just slightly. Outside, the world is beginning to reveal itself. A pale, uncertain light. Frost clinging to the ground. The outline of trees standing still and dark against the sky. No colour yet. Just shape and suggestion. The door closes again. The room exhales. The contrast lingers for a moment, then fades as the fire reasserts itself. You look back at the hearth. Steady, reliable, the centre of everything. And as the sounds of the waking world continue to gather inside and out, you realise something else. This place may be rough, unfinished, and constantly shifting, but it speaks, and if you are quiet enough, patient enough, willing enough to listen, you can begin to understand what it is saying. The warmth has reached your hands, but not quite your resolve. You glance toward the corner where the water bucket waits, already knowing what you will find and still hoping for reasons you cannot quite justify, that this morning might be different. It never is, but hope like fire tends to linger even when it has little reason to. You cross the room, slowly, boots pressing softly against the wooden floor. The bucket sits near the wall where it has been all night undisturbed, collecting the cold as thoroughly as anything else in the room. A thin rim of frost traces its edge, delicate as lace, though far less charming in practice. You crouch beside it. Your fingers hover again just as they did over the embers earlier. A familiar hesitation. Then you reach out and touch the surface. Solid. Not entirely perhaps, but enough. The water has formed a skin of ice across the top, thin in some places, thicker in others. You tap it lightly. It answers with a dull, brittle sound. Of course it has. On the frontier, especially in colder months, it was common for indoor water supplies to partially freeze overnight, even when kept inside. Cabins rarely held enough heat through the night to prevent it. So mornings often began with this small but persistent obstacle turning frozen water back into something usable. You press your fingers a little harder against the surface. The ice cracks. A faint, satisfying sound, like something giving way after holding out just long enough to make its point. You push again, breaking through the thin layer, and the cold water beneath greets you with immediate, unapologetic intensity. You withdraw your hand quickly. That was unnecessary. You knew it would be cold, but knowing and feeling are rarely the same thing. You exhale, then try again. This time you keep your hand in the water a moment longer. Long enough to scoop a small amount into your palm, long enough to feel the sharp sting settle into something duller, more manageable. Your skin protests, but less dramatically than before. You bring the water to your face. The first splash is a shock. Your breath catches your eyes close instinctively, and for a brief moment every other sensation disappears beneath the sheer immediacy of cold. It is not refreshing in the way modern comfort might suggest. It is bracing. Demanding, impossible to ignore. You wipe your face with the back of your hand, the chill lingering. A second splash follows. Slightly easier. Not pleasant exactly, but no longer surprising. Your skin begins to adapt, the initial sting giving way to a strange clarity. You feel more awake now, though perhaps alert is the more accurate word. There were even accounts of settlers using snow itself in place of water during the coldest mornings, rubbing it across their hands and faces when liquid water was too difficult to manage. Not a daily practice for everyone, but common enough to appear in scattered descriptions. Practical, if not particularly inviting. You shake your hands dry, flexing your fingers to bring warmth back into them. Behind you, someone approaches. Frozen again, they ask, voice still rough with sleep. You nod. Thin layer. They grunt in acknowledgement, stepping closer to inspect the bucket themselves. There is no surprise in their expression, only a quiet acceptance. This is how mornings behave. There is no point in expecting otherwise. You step aside, giving them space. Your attention drifts briefly to the small cloth hanging nearby. You take it, dampen it slightly, and run it across your face once more. The fabric is stiff at first, then softens as it absorbs the water. You move slowly, deliberately, as if there is no reason to rush through this part. And there isn't really. Rushing only makes the cold feel sharper. You hang the cloth back in its place. The room feels different now. Not warmer necessarily, but more active. More awake. Movements are more frequent. Voices, though still quiet, carry more intention. The day is gathering itself piece by piece. You glance again at the bucket. The broken ice floats unevenly on the surface, shifting slightly with each movement of the water. It will need to be dealt with properly later, either removed or melted, but for now it serves its purpose well enough. Some frontier households kept water containers closer to the fire overnight in an attempt to prevent freezing, though this was not always practical. Space near the hearth was limited and priorities varied. Food tools and people often competed for that warmer ground. You step back toward the hearth, drawn again by its steady presence. The fire has grown stronger in your absence, the larger logs beginning to take hold. The flames move with more confidence now, no longer tentative or uncertain. They fill the space with a low, constant sound that feels almost reassuring. You extend your hands once more. The warmth returns, easing the lingering chill from the water. Your skin tingles as it adjusts the contrast between cold and heat, creating a sensation that is both uncomfortable and oddly satisfying. Across the room, someone laughs softly, not loudly, not fully awake yet, but enough to suggest that the worst of the morning has passed. There is a lightness to it, brief and quiet, like a flicker of something that will grow later in the day. You glance over. They are rubbing their hands together, breath visible in the air, expressions somewhere between amused and resigned. You understand that look. It is the expression of someone who has done this many times before and will do it many times again. There is comfort in repetition, even when the repetition itself is not comfortable. You settle near the hearth again, letting the warmth settle deeper into your bones. Outside, the light continues its slow work. The grey has shifted, softened, begun to hint at something brighter. Shapes are clearer now, edges more defined. The world is becoming visible whether it feels ready or not. You take a slow breath. The air is still sharp, still carries that faint edge of smoke, but it no longer feels hostile. It feels like something you can exist within without constant negotiation. And as you stand there, hands warming, face still tingling from cold water, the room quietly alive around you, you realise something simple. Waking on the frontier is not about comfort. It is about adjustment. To the cold, to the work, to the small persistent challenges that greet you before the sun even decides to show itself. You have faced the dark. You have revived the fire. You have broken the ice. And somehow, without quite noticing when it happened, you are fully awake. The cold has retreated just enough to make you aware of something else. Hunger. It arrives quietly at first, almost politely, as if it does not wish to interrupt the careful balance you have built between warmth and wakefulness. But it grows quickly. The kind of hunger that belongs to early morning sharpened by cold air and the promise of a long day ahead. You glance toward the small area near the hearth where food is kept, not stored in any elaborate way, just placed where it makes sense, close enough to warmth to be accessible, far enough to avoid smoke and sparks. A pot rests there, blackened from repeated use, along with a few simple items, a sack, a wooden bowl, perhaps a slab of something wrapped in cloth. You move toward it already knowing what breakfast will be, not because you remember choosing it, but because options here are limited in a very honest way. Meals on the frontier, especially in winter, tend toward simplicity. Corn meal salt pork, maybe leftover bread if the previous day had been generous. You lift the lid of the pot. A faint smell rises, grain, faintly sweet, slightly stale. Familiar. You add a bit of water, careful not to spill, and set the pot closer to the fire. It will take time to heat, and patience is not optional. Meals like this were common across much of early America, particularly in rural and frontier regions. Corn-based dishes, porridge, mush, johnny cakes formed a reliable part of daily life because corn was hardy, adaptable, and relatively easy to store. It was not glamorous food, but it kept people moving. You reach for a small piece of salt pork. It is firm, dense, and carries the unmistakable scent of preservation. You slice off a portion, the knife moving with practiced efficiency, and set it aside to warm. The fat will render slowly adding flavour, and a small measure of comfort to the meal. Behind you, someone shifts closer. Smells like breakfast, they say, voice lighter now. Almost you reply. They nod, settling near the hearth, hands extended toward the fire. There is no rush in their movement. Everyone here understands that food takes time, especially when it begins in a cold room with reluctant ingredients. You stir the pot gently. The mixture thickens slowly, responding to the heat with quiet cooperation. Steam rises in thin threads, carrying a scent that is both plain and oddly reassuring. It is not the kind of smell that excites. It is the kind that promises steadiness. You lean back slightly, giving the pot space. Outside, the light has grown stronger, though it still lacks warmth. The sky beyond the small window, or perhaps just the gaps between logs, has shifted from grey to something softer, a pale suggestion of morning that continues to build without urgency. You listen again. The sounds have changed. More movement now. A distant call, perhaps another rooster answering the first. The faint lowing of cattle somewhere beyond the immediate clearing, life gradually returning to motion. You stir the pot again. The texture is thicker now, more substantial. You add a pinch of salt, measured more by habit than by exact thought. Supplies must last. Every addition is considered even when it appears casual. There is a quiet satisfaction in this process. Not joy exactly, but a sense of doing what needs to be done in the way it has always been done. There is comfort in that continuity even when the task itself is unremarkable. Some households added molasses or a bit of sugar to their morning meal when it was available, though such additions were not guaranteed. Sweetness in this context was less a standard, and more an occasional reward dependent on trade harvest and circumstance. You glance at the others. They are fully awake now or close enough. Movements are purposeful. One adjusts their coat, another checks something near the door. There is an unspoken understanding that the day is beginning in earnest. You lift the pot slightly, testing its weight, then set it back. Almost ready, the salt pork begins to sizzle faintly, the sound soft but distinct. The smell deepens richer now, adding a layer of warmth that the fire alone cannot provide. It fills the room, slowly weaving through the lingering smoke, creating something that feels almost inviting. You take a breath. It helps. Not just physically, but mentally. Food, even simple food, marks a transition. From waking to working, from enduring to engaging. There is a small, curious detail, sometimes mentioned in personal accounts. From this period, people occasionally ate in near silence during the earliest part of the day, not out of formality, but because conversation required energy that had not yet fully returned. It was only later as the day progressed that voices grew more animated. You can understand that now. You reach for a wooden bowl, then another. No ceremony, just practicality. You ladle the thickened mixture into each, dividing it evenly or as evenly as possible. Fairness matters even when portions are modest. You pass one bowl to the person nearest you. They accept it with a nod, murmuring thanks that feels more habitual than expressive. Still, it matters. Small acknowledgements repeated daily build something steady between people. You take your own portion. The heat seeps through the bowl into your hands, a welcome contrast to the lingering chill. You hold it for a moment before eating, letting that warmth settle into your fingers. Then you begin. The first bite is plain. Not unpleasant, not remarkable. Just sustaining. The texture is thick, the flavour simple, the warmth immediate. It spreads through you, slowly easing the last traces of cold from your core. You eat quietly. Around you, the same pattern repeats. Small movements, soft sounds, the rhythm of spoons against wood, of breath of fire continuing its steady work. This is breakfast, not a grand event, not something to linger over longer than necessary, but essential, foundational, the fuel that will carry you into whatever the day demands. There is perhaps a small comfort in its predictability. Some thinkers have suggested that meals like this, repeated day after day, created a kind of stability in lives that were otherwise uncertain. Others question whether such routines felt comforting at the time or simply unavoidable. It is difficult to know exactly how people experienced their own habits when those habits were the only option available. You take another bite. The room feels warmer now. Not truly warm, but enough that the sharp edge of the morning has softened into something manageable. The fire, the food, the presence of others, all of it combines into a quiet equilibrium. Outside, the light continues to grow. Soon the door will open again. The day will expand beyond these walls. Work will begin in earnest. But for now, in this brief, steady moment, you sit with your bowl, your hands warmed by both fire and food, and you feel something close to balance. Not comfort, but readiness sustained by something simple and real. The warmth from the food settles into you slowly like a quiet agreement between your body and the morning. You finish the last of it without ceremony, scraping the bowl with a steady, practiced motion. Nothing is wasted here. Not food, not heat, not effort. You set the bowl aside, and for a brief moment you feel almost still caught between what has been done and what must follow. Around you the same quiet rhythm continues. Someone wipes their mouth with the back of their hand. Another leans closer to the fire, turning slightly to warm one side then the other. A child fully awake now swings their legs idly from the edge of the bed, watching everything with the patient curiosity of someone who knows their turn to work will come, just not yet. You glance at them. There is a softness there, even in this room, even in this cold. It is easy to forget in all this practicality that life here includes moments that are not measured in labour or survival. But those moments are brief. You rise again, setting your bowl near the others. It will be cleaned later. for now there are more pressing things to consider. The room feels smaller now, not physically, but in the way your attention has shifted. You are no longer focused inward. The walls, the fire, the shared space, they have done their part. Now your thoughts begin to drift outward toward what waits beyond. You move toward the door, not to open it yet, just to stand near it to sense what lies on the other side. The wood feels cold beneath your hand, though less so than before. The iron latch carries its own sharp chill, a reminder that anything untouched by the fire remains loyal to the night. You pause. There is a particular moment in mornings like this, a quiet threshold where you stand between two worlds. Behind you, the small, controlled environment of the cabin fire food, familiar faces. Ahead, the open land, unpredictable, demanding vast in ways that resist easy understanding. You listen. The outside is no longer silent. The sounds have gathered strength. Birds, now more than one, their calls overlapping in uneven patterns. The distant shifting of animals' hooves against frozen ground, the low murmur of livestock waiting for attention. Even the wind has changed its tone less, whispering now more present. You rest your forehead lightly against the door for a second. It is colder than you expect. You pull back with a faint, almost amused exhale, a small mistake quickly corrected. The frontier has a way of reminding you gently but firmly that assumptions are rarely rewarded. Behind you someone speaks. Best not wait too long. You nod without turning. They are right. Days are shorter in winter and every hour of light matters. This is not a place where mornings stretch lazily into afternoon. Time is a resource, and like all resources here, it must be used carefully. In early 19th century frontier life, much of the day's labour feeding animals, gathering wood, maintaining tools depended on daylight. Without it, tasks became slower, riskier, sometimes impossible. That simple fact shaped daily routines in ways that feel almost foreign now. You lift the latch. The metal shifts with a soft, reluctant sound. You hesitate just long enough to feel the warmth at your back one more time, then pull the door open. Cold air enters immediately, not gradually, not politely. It rushes in with purpose, filling the space left by the door as if it has been waiting for this exact moment. You feel it against your face, your hands, the edges of your clothing. It sharpens every sensation, clears the lingering haze of warmth and smoke. You step forward. The ground outside is hard beneath your boots, the frost thick enough to crunch faintly with each movement. The sky is brightened, though the sun itself remains hidden behind the horizon. The light is pale, diffuse, spreading across the land without offering much heat in return. You take a breath. It is cleaner out here, sharper. The air feels almost new compared to the layered scent of the cabin. Wood smoke still clings to you, but it fades slightly in the open space. You look around. The landscape stretches outward in quiet simplicity. Trees stand bare, their branches thin and dark against the morning sky. The ground is uneven, marked by paths worn through repeated use. A fence, rough functional, marks the edge of a small clearing. Beyond that, the land continues less defined, more uncertain. This is where the day unfolds. You hear movement to your left. A small group of chickens peck at the ground, their feathers puffed slightly against the cold. They move with quick, efficient motions, unconcerned with the temperature, in a way that feels almost unfair. One pauses, tilting its head, as if considering you, then returns to its work. There is something steadying about that. Animals in their way do not question the morning. They meet it directly without hesitation or complaint. It is not bravery. It is simply how they exist. You step further into the clearing. Your breath forms small clouds that drift and disappear. The light continues to grow, though slowly. Everything is visible now, but not yet fully alive with colour. The world feels muted, as if it is still deciding how much of itself to reveal. Behind you, the door closes. The sound is soft but final. You are outside now. There is no returning to the bed, no retreating into the small comfort of the blanket. The day has begun in earnest, and you are part of it. You flex your hands, feeling the lingering warmth from the fire fade as the cold reasserts itself. It is not as shocking as before. Your body has adjusted, adapted. It accepts this now as part of the pattern. There is a quiet idea that appears in some personal writings from this period, that early mornings outdoors had a way of sharpening the mind, making everything feel more immediate, more real. Not necessarily pleasant, but clarifying. Others suggest that such reflections may be shaped by hindsight, by memory, smoothing over the harsher edges of experience. It is difficult to separate what people felt in the moment from how they later chose to describe it. You take another step. The frost crunches again beneath your boots, louder now in the open space. The sound feels grounding, marking your presence in a world that otherwise moves without you. You glance back at the cabin. Smoke rises from the chimney in a thin, steady line drifting into the pale sky. It looks almost delicate from here, though you know how much effort it represents. Inside the room continues its quiet life. Outside the work waits. And as you stand there, breath-visible hands beginning to cool again, the land stretching out in front of you, you understand something simple. Waking was only the beginning. Now the day asks for more. The cold outside feels different from the cold inside. Inside it pressed close, trapped in the walls and floor, something you had to negotiate with quietly. Out here it moves. It travels. It has direction. It brushes past your face, slides along your sleeves, settles briefly before shifting again. You feel it more clearly, but somehow it feels less personal. You step further into the yard, your boots finding the familiar path without needing to look down. The ground tells its own story beneath you. Hard-packed earth, uneven in places with patches of frost that crunch sharply, and others that hold firm, silent. You adjust your footing instinctively, your body remembering what your mind does not need to think about. To your right, a small structure leans slightly against the edge of the clearing. The wood pile, you head toward it because of course you do. Fire may be alive behind you, but it will not remain so without steady attention. One morning's effort is never enough. Fuel must be gathered, stacked, protected. It is a rhythm as reliable as breathing. Wood was one of the most essential resources for frontier households, especially during winter months. A family might burn several cords over a season, depending on the climate and the size of the cabin. That is not a small amount. Every log represents time, labour and planning done well in advance. You reach the pile and run your hand along the top layer. The logs are cold but dry. That matters. Damp wood would smoke heavily, resist burning and waste both time and energy. Someone here has done their work properly, stacking it under cover, keeping it ready for mornings like this. You select a few pieces, judging their weight, their size. Not too large, not too small. Enough to sustain the fire without overwhelming it. You tuck them under your arm, the rough bark pressing against your coat, and turn back toward the cabin. Halfway there you pause. A sound. Closer this time. You turn your head, slightly listening. From beyond the fence in the line where trees begin to thicken, something moves. Not quickly, not with urgency. Just a steady shifting branches brushing against one another, a quiet presence making its way through the undergrowth. You stand still. It could be anything. Deer again, perhaps, or something smaller, or nothing at all, just the wind finding new path through the trees. The frontier is generous with possibilities and rarely confirms them. You wait a moment longer, then move on. Not everything needs to be known. Back at the cabin, you nudge the door open with your shoulder, careful not to drop the wood. The warmth inside greets you immediately, a soft contrast to the sharper air outside. Not strong, not overwhelming, but enough to feel like a return. You set the logs beside the hearth. The fire welcomes them with a quiet shift in its sound, a deeper crackle as the new wood begins to take hold. You arrange them carefully, leaving space for air, watching the flames adjust and climb. Behind you, movement continues. Someone is tying a scarf around their neck. Another pulls on gloves, flexing their fingers to test the fit. The room has changed again, moving from waking into preparation. There is purpose in every motion now. You straighten, brushing a bit of bark from your coat. Wood's good, you say more to the room than to anyone in particular. A nod answers you. That'll help, someone replies. Simple words, enough. You step back from the hearth, letting the fire settle into its new rhythm. It feels stronger now, more certain. The room responds accordingly, the air shifting just slightly warmer, the smoke thinning as the draft improves. You glance toward the table, if it can be called that. A rough surface worn from use holding a few scattered items, a tool, a piece of cloth, something wrapped and set aside. Nothing decorative, everything practical. Your attention catches on a small object near the edge, a tin cup. You pick it up, turning it in your hands, cold still though it begins to warm quickly from your touch. You fill it with a bit of water from the bucket, careful to avoid the remaining ice, and hold it near the fire. Not to heat it fully, just enough to take the edge off. Hot drinks were not always available in the way we might expect. Coffee existed, yes, but supplies could be inconsistent, especially during periods of disrupted trade. Tea similarly was not guaranteed. Many mornings began simply with water, or perhaps something warmed if circumstances allowed. You take a sip, cool but not biting enough. Across the room, the child you noticed earlier has begun to gather small items, perhaps kindling, perhaps something else. Their movements are careful, deliberate, learning even now how to be part of this routine. There is no formal instruction happening, no lecture, no demonstration. Just observation and imitation repeated until it becomes second nature. Some historians suggest that much of frontier knowledge was passed along in exactly this way, through daily participation rather than structured teaching. Others point out that necessity leaves little room for alternative methods. When tasks must be done, they are learned by doing. You set the cup down. The room feels fuller now, not in space but in presence. Everyone is moving, preparing, aligning themselves with the demands of the day. There is no rush, but there is no delay either. Each action follows naturally from the last. You move toward the door again, this time without hesitation. The latch lifts, the door opens, and the cold greets you once more. But it feels different now, less like a challenge, more like a condition, something to work within rather than against. You step outside again. The light has strengthened the sky now, a clearer shade of pale morning. The trees stand sharper against it, their outlines more defined. The world is no longer waiting, it is ready. You take a breath deeper this time. The air fills your lungs cleanly, sharply, waking you fully in a way nothing inside the cabin quite managed. You exhale slowly, watching the vapour drift away. There is work to be done, animals to tend, paths to clear, tools to check, tasks that do not announce themselves but are known all the same. You look out across the clearing, then back at the cabin, then out again. This is the pattern. Inside and outside, warmth and cold, preparation and action. And as you take your first steps into the morning's work, you realise something that has been building quietly since you first woke. The frontier does not ease you into the day. It expects you to meet it where it is. And now finally you're ready to do exactly that. The cold settles into you again, but this time it does not feel like an interruption. It feels like part of the rhythm. You move toward the small enclosure where the animals wait your steps, steady now, less cautious than before. The ground crunches beneath your boots in a familiar pattern, each sound marking your progress across the clearing. The air carries more life than it did earlier. Faint movements, distant calls, the quiet insistence of a world already in motion. The livestock notice you before you reach them. A low sound rises somewhere between expectation and complaint. They shift in place, hooves pressing into the frozen ground, breath rising in soft clouds. They know what comes next, not because they understand the day, but because they recognize the pattern. You unlatch the gate. The wood resists, slightly stiff from the cold, then gives with a soft splintered creak. You step inside, closing it behind you out of habit. Always close it. Always check. Small oversights here have larger consequences than they should. You move toward the nearest animal, a cow perhaps or two. Their bodies radiate a steady warmth visible in the steam that rises faintly from their backs. You reach out, resting your hand briefly against one of them. The contrast is immediate living heat against the cold air. It feels grounding. You begin the morning tasks without needing to think through them step by step. Feed is gathered, measured, distributed. Movements repeat themselves in a sequence shaped by necessity rather than choice. In many frontier households, tending animals was among the first duties of the day, often completed before full daylight. Livestock represented not just food, but survival itself, milk-meat labour. Neglecting them even briefly could ripple outward into larger problems. You scatter feed along the trough. The animals respond instantly, lowering their heads, the soft sound of chewing filling the space. It is a steady, almost soothing noise, repetitive in a way that feels oddly calming after the sharper sounds of the morning. You check the water, frozen again, though thicker here. You tap the surface with the edge of a tool, breaking through the ice with a series of dull, cracking sounds. Pieces shift and settle, creating uneven openings where the animals can drink. It is not elegant, but it works. There is a curious detail sometimes mentioned in accounts of early farming life animals, often adapted to these routines with remarkable consistency, learning when to expect food, water, and attention even in harsh conditions. Whether this was instinct or learned behaviour is still quietly discussed among those who study such things. You move along the enclosure, checking each section. Nothing unusual, no broken boards, no signs of trouble, just the steady continuation of a routine that has likely been repeated for months, years, perhaps longer. You pause for a moment, leaning slightly against the fence. Your breath rises in slow, even patterns now. The cold no longer steals it from you. Your body has adjusted, found its balance between effort and environment. You look out beyond the enclosure. The trees stand still, their branches bare but defined. The light has strengthened further, though the sun itself remains hidden. The sky holds a pale clarity, promising brightness without offering warmth. Somewhere in the distance, a faint sound carries voices, perhaps. Another household beginning its own day. The frontier may be scattered, but it is not entirely isolated. People exist out there beyond the line of sight, moving through similar routines, facing similar mornings. You straighten and return to your work. There are tools to check. You step back toward the cabin, stopping near a small collection of implements leaning against the wall. An axe worn smooth at the handle. A shovel, its edge dulled from repeated use. A few other items, each bearing the marks of long familiarity. You pick up the axe. Its weight is reassuring. Not light, but balanced. You run your hand along the handle, feeling the grain of the wood, the slight imperfections that have formed over time. This tool has done its work again and again. Tools like these were often maintained carefully repaired rather than replaced because access to new ones was not always reliable. Trade routes could be disrupted, supplies delayed. What you had you kept. What you used you cared for. You test the edge briefly. It will do. You set it back, adjusting its position so it rests securely. Small details again. Small habits that prevent larger problems. Behind you the door opens. Another person steps out, pulling their coat tighter around them. They nod in your direction, then move toward the enclosure, taking over where you have left off. There is no formal exchange of duties, just a quiet understanding. Tasks flow from one person to another, guided by need rather than instruction. You move a little further from the cabin, your attention shifting outward once more. The clearing feels more defined now, the boundaries clearer in the growing light. You can see where the ground dips slightly, where paths have formed, where repeated movement has shaped the space into something functional. You follow one of those paths briefly, just a few steps. It leads toward a small stack of cut wood separate from the main pile. You inspect it quickly, noting its condition, its size. Planning, always planning. What will be needed later? What must be prepared in advance? Some observers of frontier life have noted how much of each day was spent anticipating the next gathering, storing, repairing, not out of anxiety, but out of necessity. The future was not something to consider abstractly. It was something to prepare for constantly. You turn back toward the cabin. Smoke continues to rise from the chimney, steady and thin. The door remains open now, letting light and air move more freely between inside and out. You step closer, pausing just before re-entering. There is a moment here, brief but noticeable, where you feel the shift between roles. Outside, you're part of the land, moving, working, responding. Inside, you return to the smaller world of the cabin, contained, shared, structured differently. You step through the doorway. The warmth greets you again, more noticeable now after time spent outside. The fire has grown stronger still, the room holding on to its heat more effectively. You move toward the hearth, extending your hands once more. The cycle continues, and as you stand there, feeling the warmth return, hearing the quiet sounds of others moving round you, you realize something that has settled into place without announcement. This is not a sequence of separate tasks. It is one continuous motion. From waking to fire to food to work, each part flows into the next, forming a pattern that holds the day together. And once you're inside that pattern, you do not question it. You simply move with it. You step back inside, and the shift feels immediate, almost like passing through an invisible curtain. The air is thicker here, warmer touched by fire and breath, and the slow layering of daily life. Your hands, still cool from outside, begin to loosen again as you hold them near the hearth. The flames answer with a steady glow, more confident now their light, pushing farther into the corners of the room. Behind you, the door remains open, just enough to let in a pale ribbon of morning. Not wide, just a careful gap. Enough for light, not enough to surrender all the warmth you've built. It is a compromise like most things here. You glance around. The room is fully awake now. Not bustling, not loud, but active in a quiet, coordinated way. Each person moves with purpose, their actions fitting together without the need for instruction. A scarf tied, a tool picked up, a piece of cloth folded and set aside. It feels almost rehearsed, but it isn't. It is simply practiced. You notice a small pile near the wall, items gathered for the day. A coil of rope, a worn satchel, something wrapped in cloth, likely food saved for later. These are the things that will leave the cabin, carried out into the wider world as the day unfolds. You crouch, briefly adjusting one of the bundles. The fabric is rough but secure, knotted in a way that suggests repetition rather than careful thought. You tighten it slightly, ensuring it will hold. Small adjustments like this rarely receive attention, but they matter. Out there, a loose knot can become a lost meal, and a lost meal can become a longer problem. Across the room, someone is tending to a different task. They sit near the window, if it can be called that, where a small opening allows a bit more light to enter. In their hands, a spindle turns slowly, fibres twisting into thread with steady, practiced motion. The rhythm is almost hypnotic, the soft whir of movement blending with the crackle of the fire. Spinning was a common and necessary part of daily life in many frontier households, especially for women, though not exclusively. Cloth did not simply appear. It was made piece by piece through time and patience. Every thread carried effort within it. You watch for a moment. There is something calming about the repetition, the quiet certainty of it. No urgency, no hesitation. Just a task being done because it must be done. You turn away, your attention shifting again. Near the hearth, another figure kneels, adjusting something you cannot immediately see. You step closer and notice a small pot, its contents being stirred. Slowly, perhaps something meant for later. A preparation begun early to save time as the day grows busier. You heading out? They ask without looking up. In a bit you reply. They nod, continuing their work. No further explanation is needed. You move toward the table again, picking up a small object, a piece of cloth folded carefully. You unfold it slightly, revealing its contents, a few simple items, perhaps tools, perhaps something edible. You do not inspect it closely. It is not yours. But its presence reminds you of how much must be carried into the day. Nothing here is wasted on excess. Even small items have weight, meaning purpose. There is a curious detail occasionally mentioned in personal writings. From this time, people sometimes carried small tokens or objects with them, not out of superstition exactly, but as reminders of home, of routine, of stability. A scrap of cloth, a carved piece of wood, something that connected the outside work to the inside world. Whether these objects held deeper significance or simply provided quiet comfort is something modern researchers still examine with interest. You refold the cloth and set it back in place. The fire shifts again, drawing your attention. A log settles with a soft hollow sound, sending a brief flare of sparks upward before they vanish. You step closer, adjusting the position slightly, ensuring the flames continue their steady work. It feels almost automatic now, your hands moving with confidence. The room responds, warmer subtly. The kind of warmth that does not announce itself but is felt in the absence of discomfort. Your shoulders relax slightly. Your breath no longer clouds the air as visibly. You take a slow look around. This room, rough, imperfect, constantly in need of care, holds everything together. It is where the day begins and where it will end. It is not grand, not spacious, not particularly forgiving, but it works, and that is enough. Outside, the light strengthens further. You can see more clearly now through the narrow opening shapes, sharpened edges defined. The trees stand less like shadows and more like objects. The ground reveals its texture, its unevenness, its readiness to be walked again. A faint sound reaches you. Voices distant but clearer than before. Another household, perhaps closer than you realized. The frontier may feel vast, but it is stitched together by these small scattered lives, each one moving through its own version of the same morning. You straighten, adjusting your coat. The time for lingering inside is passing. There is a moment, though, just before you move where everything seems to settle. The fire steady, the room active but calm, the light growing, the sounds aligning. It feels complete, not finished but balanced. You take a breath. The air carries warmth now mixed with the familiar scent of wood and smoke. It feels less like something to endure and more like something to move within. You step toward the door again. This time there is no hesitation. You understand the pattern now, the flow of the morning, the way each action leads naturally into the next. Inside prepares you, outside demands from you, and somewhere between the two you find your place. You rest your hand on the latch, feeling its cold edge once more, though it no longer surprises you. Then you open the door, letting the morning fully in. The morning air meets you again, but this time it feels almost familiar, not welcoming exactly. The frontier is rarely that generous, but no longer shocking. Your body has learned the shape of the cold, the way it settles against your skin, the way it slips into the seams of your clothing and lingers there. You step out with less resistance, now your movement's more certain. The light has grown stronger, still pale, still lacking warmth, but undeniably present. The horizon has softened, and the sky carries that faint, washed-out blue that belongs only to early winter mornings. The sun is near, though not yet visible, hiding just below the line of trees as if taking its time. You pause briefly, letting your eyes adjust. Across the clearing, something has changed. Tracks. You notice them where the frost has been disturbed, faint impressions pressed into the ground during the night. They cut across the open space at an angle leading from the edge of the trees toward the far side of the enclosure. You step closer. The marks are not fresh, but not old either. Edges softened slightly, but still clear enough to follow. Hoof prints, most likely. Deer again passing through in search of whatever can be found in this season. You crouch, studying them. There is a quiet satisfaction in recognizing patterns like this. The land leaves signs, subtle but consistent for those who learn to look. Tracks, broken branches, disturbed ground, all small pieces of a larger story. Some early settlers became remarkably skilled at reading such signs not out of curiosity alone, but because it mattered. Knowing what moved through your land, when and how often, could influence decisions about hunting safety, even planting. It was a kind of knowledge built slowly through observation and necessity. You stand again, brushing your hands together. The tracks continue beyond the clearing, disappearing into a line of brush where the land dips slightly. You do not follow, not today. There are other priorities. Still, you remember where they are. Behind you, the cabin door creaks open once more. Another figure steps out, pulling their coat tighter, glancing briefly in your direction before scanning the yard. Their eyes settle on the same tracks you noticed. Visitors, they say quietly. You nod. Looks like it. They step closer, examining the marks with a practiced eye. There is no alarm in their posture, only recognition. This is part of living here. The land is shared whether acknowledged or not. You move on. toward the fence line where repairs are always needed, whether immediately obvious or not. You run your hand along the rough wood, feeling for weak spots, loose pieces, anything that might give way under pressure. There one section shifts slightly. You press against it, testing. Not broken. Not yet. But worn enough to need attention soon. You make a mental note, the kind that settles into place without needing to be written down. It will be dealt with, just not this moment. Maintenance on the frontier rarely happened all at once. It was continuous, folded into the day wherever space allowed. A loose board here, a worn hinge there. Small fixes that prevented larger failures. You move along the fence, checking the rest. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming. Good. The wind picks up slightly, brushing across the clearing with a sharper edge. You feel it against your face, your hands, the exposed edges of your clothing. It carries a different tone now, less whispering, more insistent. You glance toward the trees. Their branches move faintly, not swaying, but shifting enough to show the air has grown more active. It will likely stay that way. A colder day, as was suggested earlier. You turn back toward the cabin. Smoke continues to rise, though it bends now under the influence of the wind trailing sideways before fading into the sky. It is a small detail, but it tells you something about the day ahead. Weather, like everything else here, reveals itself in pieces. There is a quiet idea that appears in some surviving letters from this period that people on the frontier developed an almost instinctive awareness of weather patterns, reading subtle signs in wind, sky and sound. Whether this was truly instinct or simply learned observation over time is something modern researchers continue to explore. You step toward the woodpile again, not because it needs immediate attention, but because it always benefits from it. You adjust a few pieces, ensuring they remain stable, protected. A log slightly out of place is corrected. A gap is closed. Small things. Always small things. Behind you the sounds of activity increase. Voices clearer now. Movement in the enclosure. The faint clatter of tools being handled, set down, picked up again. The day is no longer easing into itself. It is underway. You take a breath. The air is cold, but it feels clean. It sharpens your thoughts, steadies your movements. There is less hesitation now, less awareness of discomfort. Your body has settled into the rhythm fully. You glance once more at the tracks. Still there, still quiet. A reminder that the night does not vanish simply because the day arrives. It leaves traces subtle but persistent. You turn away. There is work waiting that does not leave marks so easily. As you step back toward the cabin, your boots pressing into the frost with steady, familiar sounds, you feel the morning settle into something more solid. No longer uncertain. No longer tentative. Just the day unfolding as it always does, asking for attention, for effort, for presence. And you are already answering. You step back inside again, not to rest, but to gather yourself for what comes next. The warmth feels fuller now, more established, as though the fire has claimed its place in the room and intends to keep it. The air no longer bites your face when you enter. Instead, it settles around you, carrying that familiar blend of smoke, wood, and quiet activity. You close the door behind you more firmly this time. The latch clicks into place, a small but satisfying sound. It marks a boundary, not a barrier against the world, but a pause between its demands. Inside the room has shifted again. The early stillness has passed. Movements are quicker now, more directed. Someone gathers tools into a bundle, tying them with practiced efficiency. Another folds a blanket and sets it aside, clearing space for whatever will be needed later. The child you noticed earlier now carries a small piece of wood toward the hearth, contributing in a way that feels both small and important. You step toward the fire. The flames have settled into a steady rhythm, no longer needing constant attention. You adjust one log slightly more out of habit than necessity, and watch as the fire responds with a gentle shift in its pattern. There is a quiet satisfaction in maintaining something that works. You turn your attention to the small area near the wall where personal items rest. A coat is lifted, a scarf adjusted. A hat worn and softened by use is placed firmly on a head. Each action is deliberate, shaped by the knowledge that once you step outside again, there will be no reason to return for forgotten things. Preparation here is not about convenience. It is about avoiding mistakes. You reach for your own belongings. A small cloth tucked into your coat. You check it without unfolding it fully. Still there. Still secure. You nod to yourself a brief acknowledgement of something done correctly. There is a curious habit noted in some early accounts. People often perform these small checks in silence, almost ritualistically before leaving their homes. Not because they expected something to go wrong, but because they understood how easily it could. You move toward the table again, picking up a simple tool. A knife. Not large, not elaborate, but essential. You test its edge lightly with your thumb, then slip it into its place at your side. The motion is smooth practiced. It feels incomplete without it. Across the room someone speaks. Heading out soon? You nod. Soon. They glance toward the door, then back at you. Wind's picking up more? I felt it, you reply. A brief exchange, but enough to share awareness. Information travels quickly in spaces like this, passed in small pieces, each one adding to the collective understanding of the day. You step back, taking in the room one more time. It is not quiet, but it is calm. Each person moving through their own tasks, yet connected by the shared rhythm of the morning. There's no need for instruction, no need for direction. Everything flows. You notice something near the hearth, a small object set carefully aside. A stone. At first glance it seems ordinary, but its position, its placement near the fire suggests otherwise. You pick it up, turning it in your hand. It is smooth, warmed slightly by the nearby heat. Stones like this were sometimes heated and carried in pockets or wrapped in cloth to provide warmth during the day, especially in colder conditions. A simple method, but effective. Heat stored and taken with you, a small piece of the fire carried into the wider world. You set it back where it was. Perhaps it belongs to someone else, or perhaps it is meant to be shared. There is a quiet practicality to such things, a willingness to use whatever is available in whatever way works. You move toward the door again. This time you do not pause. The latch lifts easily now, the motion familiar, the resistance expected. You open the door and step through, letting the cold greet you once more. It feels sharper than before. The wind has indeed strengthened, carrying with it a more insistent chill. It brushes against your face, your hands, finding every small opening in your clothing. But you are ready for it. You pull your coat tighter, adjusting the collar, tucking your chin slightly. Your body responds without hesitation, adapting to the change with practiced ease. The light is shifted again. The sun now edges above the horizon, not fully visible, but present enough to cast a faint glow across the clearing. Shadows begin to form, soft and uncertain, stretching across the frost-covered ground. You step forward. The day is no longer beginning, it has begun. There is a difference, subtle but important. The hesitation of early morning has passed. What remains is movement, action, continuation. You glance back at the cabin. Smoke rises steadily, bending with the wind, a visible sign of life within. It stands there solid and quiet, holding its place against the vastness around it. You turn away. There is no need to linger. The tasks ahead are already forming in your mind, aligning themselves with the rhythm you have stepped into. Each one connected to the last, each one leading to the next. There is a perspective sometimes mentioned in historical reflections that life on the frontier required a kind of constant readiness, a state of being prepared not just for what was planned, but for what might happen without warning. Whether this readiness felt like burden or simply normal life is something that continues to be considered. You take another breath. The air fills your lungs cold and clean, and as you move forward into the clearing once more, you feel it clearly now. The morning is no longer something you are waking into. It is something you are fully inside. You move further into the morning, and with each step the world seems to widen just a little more. The sun finally lifts itself above the horizon, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty. Its light spills across the clearing in pale gold, catching on frost, and turning it briefly into something almost beautiful. For a moment the land softens. The cold remains, but the light gives it shape, makes it easier to see, easier to accept. You squint slightly, adjusting to the brightness. It does not warm you, not yet, but it changes how everything feels. Shadows stretch long across the ground, thin and angled, following the uneven shapes of fence post trees and the cabin itself. You step through them, your boots pressing fresh marks into the frost, layering your presence over the quiet traces left behind by night. You glance again toward where you saw the tracks earlier. They are still there, clearer now in the stronger light. The edges more define the pattern, easier to follow. You can see where the animal paused, where it turned slightly, where it chose its path with quiet intention. You follow the line with your eyes, not your feet. There is no need to chase it. But there is something steadying in knowing it passed through, that the land continues its own routines alongside yours. In many frontier regions during this time, wildlife remained abundant despite increasing settlement. Deer, foxes and other animals moved freely through areas that were only lightly claimed by human presence. The balance between land and people was still shifting, still uncertain. You turn your attention back to the work at hand. There is always more. You walk toward a small shed near the edge of the clearing, its structure simple, its purpose clear. Inside, tools are stored, protected as best they can be from weather and wear. You push the door open, the wood giving with a soft groan. The air inside is colder than outside, the stillness preserving the night's chill. You step in, scanning the space. Everything is where it should be. That matters. Disorganization here does not just slow you down, it creates problems. Lost time, misplaced tools, unnecessary effort. You reach for a length of rope. It feels stiff in your hands, the fibers tightened by cold. You flex it slightly, working it loose, testing its strength. It holds. Good. You coil it loosely and carry it out with you. Rope, like many things here, serves countless purposes. Securing loads, repairing structures, guiding animals, binding what must be held together. It is one of those items that rarely draws attention but is constantly needed. You close the shed door behind you. The light outside feels brighter now, the sun climbing slowly but steadily. The clearing is fully visible, every detail sharp against the pale sky. There is no more hiding in shadow. The day has revealed itself. You walk along the fence again, this time with purpose. The section you noted earlier, the one that shifted slightly, waits for attention. You set the rope aside and press against the wood once more, confirming what you felt before. It gives just enough to matter. You crouch, examining the base. The ground has shifted slightly, frost working its way into the soil, loosening what was once firm. It is a small change, but enough to weaken the structure over time. You straighten and begin to work. There is no need for elaborate tools, just adjustment pressure, a bit of reinforcement. You reposition the board, tighten the binding, secure it more firmly against the post. Your movements are steady, deliberate, shaped by repetition. This is how most repairs happen here, not as separate tasks, but as part of everything else. Not waiting for a perfect moment, but handled when noticed, when needed. Some accounts from this period describe how settlers often spoke of their homes and land as things that required constant keeping a word, that suggest ongoing care rather than occasional maintenance. It reflects a mindset where nothing is ever truly finished, only managed. You step back, testing the fence again. It holds. For now, that's enough. You brush your hands together, the motion more about habit than necessity. The cold has returned to your fingers, though less sharply than before. You hardly notice it now. Behind you, movement continues. The person who followed you out earlier is working near the animals, their motion steady, efficient. There is no need for conversation. Each of you knows what must be done. You pick up the rope again, coiling it more tightly this time. There will be use for it later. There is always use for it. You take a moment to look out beyond the clearing. The trees stand unchanged, but the light has transformed them. Their branches catch the sun in places, creating small patterns of brightness against the darker wood. The ground beyond remains uneven, less travelled, more uncertain. There is a sense standing here that the world continues far beyond what you can see. Not empty, not silent, just distant. Some scholars have explored how early settlers perceived this vastness, suggesting that it could feel both liberating and isolating at the same time. The land offered opportunity, but also distance from neighbours, from news from anything resembling immediate support. You inhale slowly. The air carries a different scent now, less smoke, more earth. A faint trace of something organic, something living beneath the frost. It is subtle, but present. You exhale, watching the breath drift away. The morning has settled into itself fully now. No longer a transition, just the day. You turn back toward the cabin once more, though not to return inside. Just to mark its place, to remind yourself of its presence. A fixed point in a landscape that offers few. Then you step forward again, moving into the work that stretches ahead, each task connecting to the next, each movement part of a larger pattern that carries you through the hours. There is no grand moment here, no clear dividing line between preparation and action, only continuation, and you're already part of it. The morning is fully open now, and with that the land begins to show its more complicated face. In the first dark moments after waking, the cabin felt like the whole world. Then the fire became the centre of everything, then the yard, then the fence, then the animals. But now, as you stand at the edge of the clearing and let your gaze travel beyond the last rough boundaries of the homestead, you feel the wider truth pressing quietly into view. This place is not empty. That is the first thing. It may look wide and still and thinly peopled, especially in the pale light of an 1812 winter morning. But empty is not the right word. Never was. The fields being cut, the cabins being raised, the fences being mended, the paths being worn into the frost. All of it exists on land already known, already travelled, already named by others long before your boots ever pressed into this ground. You do not have to make a speech about it. The frontier is rarely improved by speeches. It is improved, if at all, by noticing. And so you notice. Beyond the clearing, where the trees stand thickest, where the frost lies unbroken except for those deer tracks, and whatever else passed unseen in the night, there is an older kind of order. Trails that do not announce themselves to you. Places of hunting crossing memory. Streams that have guided movement for generations. High ground chosen for reasons you may not yet understand. The land holds all of that without explaining itself. You rest one hand on a fence post and look outward a little longer. The post is rough beneath your glove, newer than the ground, newer than the trees, newer than almost anything your eye can see. That contrast matters. In 1812, much of what American settlers called the frontier was land under active pressure from expansion. Treaty-making military campaigns, speculative land claims and repeated displacement of native communities. That is the firm, ordinary truth beneath all the smaller details of daily life. Even a freezing room at dawn belongs to a bigger story, whether the people inside it say so aloud or not. The wind moves across the clearing again, carrying with it the clean scent of cold bark and distant water. You imagine how sound travels farther here than people think. A snapped twig, a voice, an axe striking wood, a dog barking, a musket if it came to that. This landscape keeps secrets, yes, but not perfectly. There were settlers who believed certain forest paths were Indian roads, old travel routes so efficient that newcomers simply adopted them rather than improving on them. That small practical borrowing happened more often than people like to admit later. It turns out the quickest way through a difficult landscape is often the route someone wiser has already found. You shift your footing and glance toward the tree line again. It does not look hostile in any theatrical way. That is what makes it more serious. The danger in places like this is often wrapped in ordinary appearances. A quiet stand of timber, a bend in the river, a path that seems unused. The frontier has a gift for hiding consequences inside scenery. Some historians continue to dispute whether many settler families fully grasped the political complexity of the ground beneath them, or whether most were more narrowly focused on weather crop survival and family routine. The likely answer, as it so often is untidily mixed. Some understood very well, some understood partly. Some preferred not to look too closely, because looking too closely can make a fence feel less simple than a fence wants to feel. You breathe into your hands for warmth and start walking along the edge of the clearing. Not far, just enough to feel where your lived-in space gives way to something less certain. The frost is thinner here under the trees, the ground changes texture, needles leaves roots, a different sound underfoot, less crunch, more hush. Even that feels like information. You pause beside a stump old enough now to have weathered smooth along the top. Someone cut it. Not recently. Perhaps last season. Perhaps earlier. The trees near it have adjusted branches reaching where space opened. The land is always responding, even when people imagine they are the only ones changing things. A bird startles from low brush and lifts suddenly into the cold air. You stop at once more from instinct than fear. The wings beat sharply, then fade into the woods. And there it is again, that feeling the frontier offers in quick flashes, that you are not alone, never alone, only sometimes the loudest creature present. You think of news, of rumours carried from settlement to settlement, of talk that would have drifted even into places like this in 1812, militia musters, British movements, alliances, raids, broken promises, uncertain loyalties. War does not need paved streets to arrive. It travels very well through worry. By this stage of the War of 1812, frontier communities in places like the Northwest Territory and Western settlements lived with very real anxiety about conflict involving the United States, Britain, and native confederacies. For many households, the war was not an abstract matter argued in distant halls. It could shape where men drilled, how families slept, and what noises in the dark seemed worth fearing. That knowledge sits differently once you've already woken in the cold, revived a fire, broken ice for water, and stepped into the first light. The grand story and the private one are not separate. They sit inside each other. A political border might be argued on paper hundreds of miles away, and yet the result can still change how tightly you latch a door before dawn. You kneel for a moment near the edge of a narrow path. Not a road, not one of your own worn tracks, something older in its logic, subtle in its line. It slips between trees in a way your fence never could. Efficient, quiet, sure of itself. You do not follow it. That feels important too. There are some things the land offers only to those who know how to read it fully. Scholars still debate how much frontier households depended on native knowledge, while simultaneously denying or obscuring that dependence in later recollections. It is one of those uncomfortable questions that keeps returning because the evidence is stubborn. Crops, roots, medicines, local geography, seasonal timing, settlers did not invent their understanding from nothing. Much of it came directly or indirectly from people already rooted in the place. You stand again, brushing a bit of frost from your coat. The cabin looks different from here. Smaller. Less like the whole world, more like a claim within it. Smoke continues to rise from the chimney in a thin line, then break apart in the moving air. Home, yes. Shelter, yes. But also a marker, a signal, a statement visible from farther away than the people inside may realise. And perhaps that is what this stage of the morning feels like now. Not just cold, not just labour, not even just endurance. Awareness. You become aware that the freezing room where you woke exists inside layers of history that do not disappear because the fire is lit. The blanket, the breakfast, the fence, the animals, the tools, none of them float free of the land's older meanings. They rest on top of them sometimes uneasily. A fox, people sometimes said, could pass near a cabin at dawn without making half the trouble that a boundary line could. Oddly enough, that feels true. Nature is not always the most disruptive thing in frontier life. Human decisions made far away and carried slowly outward often do more damage than weather ever could. You turn back toward the yard. Work still waits. It always does. The land may hold argument, memory, grief, survival, and ambition all at once. But the bucket still needs lifting and the fence still needs watching. History inconveniently does not stop daily chores from being daily chores, so you walk back with that fuller understanding settling gently into you. The morning air remains cold. The light remains pale. Your boots still find the half-frozen ground with the same steady sound. But now the frontier feels less like an empty stage and more like contested ground wearing a calm expression. And perhaps that is closer to the truth. You come back toward the cabin with a steadier step, though not because the day has become easier. It has simply become clearer. There is a peculiar kind of comfort in that. Not softness, not relief, just definition. Earlier before dawn, everything felt wrapped in uncertainty. The room was dark, the floor bitterly cold, the fire only a hope beneath ash, the outside world a set of sounds without edges. But now the morning has opened itself fully, and in that opening you begin to see how frontier life is held together, less by ease than by 1,000 small corrections. That fence post you just checked, the water crusted with ice, the rope kept dry, the wood stacked under cover, the bowl scraped clean, the latch lifted and lowered. None of it looks grand. None of it announces itself as history while it is happening. Yet this is how a life survives here, through constant attention, through care that is so ordinary it almost disappears. You pause near the doorway and brush frost from one sleeve. The gesture is small automatic. Even that feels like part of the lesson. You're always brushing something away. Ash, cold, snow, dampness, worry. The frontier does not permit long neglect. Leave a thing untended and it begins almost at once to drift toward trouble. Inside, the warmth meets you again, though by now it feels less miraculous and more earned. The fire holds steady in the hearthwood, shifting inward with a soft collapse and a burst of sparks that rise and vanish before they reach the chimney throat. Someone has added another log while you were out. Of course they have. The labour here is shared in that quiet practical way that rarely needs naming. One person steps outside, another turns the pot, someone else checks the animals, another folds cloth or sets aside a tool. The day is a braid of little efforts. You stand near the flames and let your hands thaw once more. The heat does not rush at you. It settles. It works its way through glove skin, knuckle bone. You flex your fingers and feel the stiffness loosen in tiny stages. It is remarkable, really, how much happiness can fit inside the simple return of feeling to your fingertips. There are stories from early rural America of people carrying hot-baked potatoes in their pockets as hand warmers on severe winter days. Whether it happened often or only often enough to become one of those details people loved repeating it, has the ring of frontier logic. If you can warm your hands and have something to eat later, why would you not? A luxury item and a practical device all in one lumpy little miracle. You almost smile at the thought. A child near the hearth is arranging small splints of wood into a neat stack, then rearranging them as if the order matters deeply. Perhaps it does. That is another truth of these households. The little jobs are not merely little, they are training. Attention is taught by use. Care is taught by repetition. You watch for a moment as one piece teeters, falls, and is set right again with grave seriousness. There is tenderness in that, though it wears a plain face. The room around you has softened since those first dreadful moments before dawn. Not softened into comfort exactly, but into livability. The smoke hangs lighter now. The chill no longer rises from the floor like an insult. The walls still creak now and then, and a thread of air still sneaks through some unseen gap. But the place has been reclaimed from the night, and yet even now, with warmth in the hearth and daylight outside, the morning remains fragile. That is what you begin to feel more sharply in this section of the day. How dependent everything is on luck behaving itself. A spark in the wrong place, a hinge giving way, a pot cracking, a strap snapping, a foot slipping on frozen ground. The frontier does not only ask for strength, it asks for good fortune again and again in amounts so modest they're easy to overlook. A chimney fire, for example, could begin with nothing more dramatic than creosote and bad timing. A single overlooked fault might turn a home into panic within minutes. Cabin fires were a known hazard in early America, especially where wood smoke, dry materials, and constant open flame lived close together. People knew this perfectly well, and still had no choice but to keep fire as the centre of daily life. Imagine designing a life around your greatest comfort, and your greatest threat being the very same thing. Cosy, yes, also mildly unreasonable. You step closer to the mantel, if that rough shelf can be called a mantel, and notice a few objects laid there with care. A tin spoon, a small twist of cloth, a repaired glove. The sort of things that look trivial until you imagine not having them. One lost glove can turn a morning task into misery. One bent spoon is still a spoon, which means it is precious. Comfort on the frontier is often less about abundance than about the successful prevention of inconvenience becoming catastrophe. Some researchers continue to disagree about whether settlers themselves thought in those terms, or whether later writers exaggerate the drama of daily life to make it more vivid for modern readers. It is a fair question. People living through hardship rarely narrate it like a novel while they are in the middle of it. Often they are simply too busy. Still, when you count how many parts of the morning could have gone wrong and did not, it becomes difficult not to feel the quiet presence of luck. You glance down at your boots. Mud later. Frost now. Damp by evening, perhaps. They're not elegant things, but they hold the day together. The leather, the stitching, the careful way they're set near warmth, but not too near all of it, belongs to the same economy of preservation. Use, repair, dry use again. A person near the table unwraps something from cloth and reveals 2 small apples wrinkled from storage but still sound. There is a murmur of approval at that faint but real, not excitement exactly, more like gratitude trying not to make a fuss. Stored fruit in late winter or deep cold can feel almost luxurious, a reminder that the year has not entirely emptied itself of sweetness. You watch as one apple is cut into narrow pieces to make it travel farther among more hands. That too feels like frontier mathematics. Not how much there is, but how far it can be stretched without losing the sense that it mattered. There is a larger comfort here as well, one not made of objects. Routine. You can feel its weight now in the room, not oppressive but supportive, like a hand at the centre of your back. Routine tells you where to put the bowl, how much wood to add, when to open the door, how to read the wind, how to move from bed to fire to water to work without wasting thought. In a life filled with variables you cannot control, habit becomes a kind of shelter. Some scholars still debate whether such routines made frontier people feel secure, or whether constant repetition simply masked a deeper exhaustion. Perhaps both can be true. A task can be comforting and wearing at the same time. So can a marriage, so can a winter, so frankly can a wool blanket. You take one of the apple slices when it is offered. It is cold crisp at the edges, softer in the middle and brighter than the rest of the morning has any right to be. For a second the taste cuts through smoke, through salt, through ash, through all the brown and grey seriousness of the day. Then it is gone. Brief comfort. Still comfort. Outside the wind presses once against the wall and moves on. Inside the fire answers with its steady crackling voice. You stand there in the middle of these small mercies and quiet risks and begin to understand something central about the frontier. It is not built only on hardship. It is built on narrow escapes from hardship becoming worse, on tiny pleasures that arrive without warning, on the fact that the wood was dry, the ember survived, the fence held, the bucket did not split, the apple kept the child learned, the morning advanced. And in that realization the room feels fuller somehow. Not safer exactly, but luckier. By now the winter morning has taught you its rules so thoroughly that it begins to feel eternal. The cold floor, the stubborn fire, the frozen water, the careful layering of clothes, the way your breath appears before you speak. Each part seems so complete, so convincing, that it is easy to imagine the frontier always looking like this. A dark room before dawn, a pale yard under frost, trees standing bare and still as if they were carved from old iron. But the room is not always like this. That is the next thing you come to understand. A frontier room does not stay one thing for long. It changes with the year, and not gracefully either. It does not move from season to season with the gentle dignity of a painting. It lurches, it sweats, it leaks, it steams, it freezes, It fills with insects, then smoke, then damp wool, then dust, then the sharp smell of curing meat or wet boots, or spring mud trying very hard to become part of the floor. So as you stand in this once freezing room with the fire steady now and the day fully underway, your mind almost cannot help drifting across the rest of the year. The same walls, the same hearth, the same narrow space, and yet each season turns it into a different kind of test. In spring this room wakes before you do. That is the first feeling of it. Not warmth exactly, but wetness. The air changes. The floor softens in spirit if not in structure. Boots come in dark with mud. Cloaks drip near the door. The smell of thawed earth clings to everything, rich and cold and alive in a way winter never is. Water no longer needs breaking open with numb fingers. Instead, it arrives everywhere at once, in ruts, in puddles, in seepage, in the persistent dampness that settles into clothes and refuses to leave politely. The morning sounds change too. Instead of the hard hush of frost, you get dripping eaves, distant birds, and the strange sucking sound of the ground trying to keep your shoes. Spring on the frontier is less a season of blossoms than a season of argument between earth and road. The mud wins most of those arguments. Many frontier travel accounts describe spring roads as nearly unusable, with wagons bogging down and ordinary trips becoming exhausting slogs. That plain fact shaped daily life more than any romantic idea of renewal ever could. A beautiful sunrise is all very well, but it loses some poetry when your axle is buried up to its own sense of dignity. In summer the room becomes close. Not always unbearably so at dawn, but enough that waking feels different in your body. The blanket is lighter. The air presses instead of bites. You wake not to protect warmth, but to escape heaviness. The hearth still matters, though less as a comfort than as a necessity for cooking, and perhaps that feels faintly insulting. Imagine already being warm and then having to light a fire indoors anyway. Civilization at times seems poorly managed. You picture the room in June or July. Flies finding their way in with offensive confidence. The smell of wood smoke mingling with sweat, with drying herbs, with the sour, sweet trace of milk pails, with whatever has been brought in from the yard. Dawn comes earlier then, and with it birds that seem to have opinions on everything. The darkness does not linger, which sounds pleasant until you remember it also means the day starts asking things of you sooner. People in frontier households often adjusted their work sharply with the seasons, using long summer daylight for planting, hoeing, building, and preserving food. The sun itself was a kind of taskmaster, and summer gave it very long office hours. There is an odd little detail mentioned in some rural recollections in hot weather. People sometimes slept with doors partly open or near loft spaces for air, only to wake with chickens, cats, or less welcome visitors, showing more curiosity than manners. A frontier room in summer could blur its edges in ways winter never allowed. The outside world didn't always wait to be invited. Autumn changes the room again. This may be the season that feels most forgiving, though even that generosity is conditional. The mornings sharpen, but not cruelly at first. The air carries smoke more sweetly. Harvest comes with its own fatigue, yes, but also with a certain fullness. Stored grain, dried beans, apples tucked away, meat salted or smoked. The room smells of labour becoming security. You can almost feel it, the faint pride of a shelf filled a bin holding aloft, stacked with what might carry you through the months ahead. Autumn waking still comes early, but it comes with evidence. The year has given something back. Of course, this is also when the room turns into a workshop of preparation. Clothes mended before deeper cold arrives. Firewood counted with suspicious eyes. Cracks in the wall noticed, then packed. Blankets aired, shaken, judged. The frontier has a seasonal talent for reminding you that comfort in January is built in October or not at all. Some historians remain divided on whether frontier families experienced autumn chiefly as relief after summer labour or as the beginning of winter anxiety. Both impressions appear in letters and diaries, and it likely depended on the harvest itself. A good crop makes philosophy easier. A poor one makes every breeze feel slightly accusatory, and then winter again. You return in thought to the room you know this morning, the one that greets your bare feet like a threat, the one where the hearth becomes the centre of emotional as well as physical life, the one where light arrives late and heat leaves early. Winter strips everything to essentials. You notice fuel, cloth drafts, food illness, and distance with a concentration the other seasons do not demand in quite the same way. Yet winter also clarifies. A room in deep cold tells the truth. Which walls hold, which stores lasted, which habits matter, which neighbours can be reached, which tools were worth repairing, which comforts are real, and which were only fair weather illusions. You move close to the fire again and look around with these imagined seasons layered over the room all at once. The peg by the wall holding a summer hat instead of a winter scarf. The floor marked with spring mud instead of frost. The corner stacked with autumn produce instead of extra kindling. The door left open for air instead of latched against the dawn. And through all of it, the same people rising, the same motions altered but recognizable. Reach for clothes, check the fire, listen outward, measure the day. Wake not because you are finished sleeping, but because life is already waiting. There is something almost tender in that continuity. The room changes costume but not purpose. It remains the place where night becomes day in practical stages, where weather is translated into chores, where the body learns season by season what is required of it, where memory gathers not in grand speeches, but in repeated gestures, a hand to the latch, a shoulder to the door, a boot to the floorboards, a face to the cold basin, a glance to the hearth. Scholars still disagree about whether modern people overstate the harshness of frontier life by imagining every season as equally punishing. It is a fair challenge. Not every morning was misery. Some were lovely. Some were brisk and bright and full of birdsong or harvest scent or rain tapping gently overhead. But even the loveliest dawn still belonged to a life of constant work. The frontier could be beautiful without being easy. In fact, it specialized in that contradiction. You think of the room in high summer before sunrise, window cracked, air heavy, someone brushing insects away from their face. You think of it in spring with wet hems steaming by the fire. You think of it in autumn with apples in a crate and cold just beginning to shape the breath. You think of it now, winter dark and severe, where waking before dawn feels like an act of agreement between your body and necessity. And perhaps that is what this section of the morning reveals most clearly. The hardship changes costume. That is all. Mud flies, damp smoke, frost, dust, hunger, heat, wind, darkness, all of them take their turn. The room never becomes effortless. It only becomes different. Every season teaches the body a new version of the same lesson: rise, adapt, continue. The frontier rather rudely does not care what month it is. It will ask something of you all year. Only the texture of the asking changes. By this point, the morning no longer feels like a sequence of separate moments. It feels like something your body knows before your mind catches up. That may be the strangest part of it, really. When you first wake in the dark, you think the hardest battle is with the room itself. The cold boards, the dead fire, the frozen water, the brutal indecency of getting dressed in clothing that feels only slightly warmer than the wall. But after enough mornings like this, something changes. The room is still cold. The work is still waiting. The world outside is still exacting and unimpressed. Yet you begin to move through it with less argument, not because it has grown kinder, because you have grown used to its demands. You stand for a moment just inside the doorway, one hand resting against the rough wood, and feel that truth settle into you. The morning is no longer a shock delivered fresh each day. It has become a pattern etched into your joints. Your muscles know when to rise. Your fingers know where the kindling is. Your shoulders know how to bend into coats and lift wood and carry water. Even your appetite seems to wake on schedule, as if your stomach has signed some private agreement with dawn. That is what repetition does. It teaches the body first. Long before you could explain frontier life in words, you could probably demonstrate it. Wake, reach, listen, stir the ash, blow gently, brace for the floor, dress quickly, test the bucket, warm the hands, check the yard, count the sounds, measure the day. These actions stack one atop the next until they become something sturdier than thought. In early American rural life, much practical knowledge was stored not in formal instruction, but in repeated bodily habits: how to lift, walk, chop, mend, stir, stack, tie, carry. It was learned through doing until the doing became almost inseparable from the person doing it. That is one of the truest things about mornings like this. They do not merely fill your time. They shape your body. You feel it in your posture. The way you stand slightly forward against the cold. The way your hands hover instinctively toward heat whenever you pass the fire. The way your feet search for the driest or least brutal patch of ground without conscious effort. The way you pause at the threshold to read weather with your face before trusting your eyes. None of that feels dramatic while it is happening. But it is a kind of education. A frontier education, if you like, though, with fewer books and considerably more splinters. Your sleep changes too, not just its length, but its quality. You imagine how deeply people must have slept after days like these, full days of carrying, lifting, bending, hauling, tending, cooking, repairing, watching. The body does not need much persuasion to sleep after that. And yet the sleep cannot be careless. A cough in the night, a baby stirring, a shift in the wind, a strange sound outside. Even rest has to remain partly alert. You doze inside necessity, never entirely beyond its reach. There is a peculiar observation that appears in some recollections of hard rural life. People sometimes claimed they could tell the hour before dawn simply by the feel of their own wakefulness. Whether that was genuine body memory, or the affectionate exaggeration of people looking backward over old routines, is hard to say. Still, it sounds plausible. After enough winters, perhaps your bones become their own clock, which is charming in theory, and rather less charming when the clock insists on operating at 4 a.m. You step farther into the room and sit briefly on the bed's edge. The mattress rustles beneath you, straw, husk, feather, whatever combination this household could manage. Even the bed teaches the body something: how to sleep with others near, how to turn without waking everyone, how to arrange blankets for maximum mercy, how to preserve warmth in a room that spends the night trying quietly to steal it back. And then there is appetite. You think of the breakfast from earlier, plain, hot, sustaining, entirely without pretension. Frontier eating trains the body too. You learn to value warmth over novelty, calories over elegance, predictability over surprise. A hot bowl before labour is not just food, it is strategy. It tells the body what kind of morning this will be, and what kind of effort will be expected. After months or years of that rhythm, your hunger begins to align itself with work. You do not want breakfast because breakfast is pleasant. You want it because your body knows what comes next and has learned not to enter it empty. Some historians still disagree about how physically robust frontier settlers typically were, and whether modern imagination turns all of them into tireless folk heroes by default. The evidence is mixed, as evidence tends to be when real human beings are involved. Some were strong because they had to be. Some were worn down young. Some endured astonishing labour while carrying old injuries, poor diets, or chronic illness. The body adapts, yes, but adaptation is not the same as invincibility. That matters, because the frontier morning lives inside the body not only as strength but as wear. You can feel it in your hands, the stiffness that does not fully leave even once the fire is going, the knuckles enlarged by work, the little scars that come from tools, wood, cold metal rope, the shoulders that lift more carefully than they did some years ago, the back that begins to speak if ignored too long, the knees that know the ground too well. This is not sentimental, it is simply true. Repetition shapes the body, but it also spends it. And still there is another side. Patience. That may be the trait the morning carves deepest of all. You cannot rush a coal into a flame. You cannot bully frozen water into softness. You cannot order daylight to arrive faster or wind to become polite. You learn timing because the world refuses to obey your moods. In that way, waking before dawn in a freezing frontier room teaches a kind of calm. Not the modern kind made of scented candles and admirable intentions. A sterner kind. A calm born from knowing that complaining changes almost nothing while attention changes quite a lot. There is also the matter of the senses. They sharpen. You hear the room more finely than someone new to it ever could. One creak means settling timber. Another means a latch not fully caught. One draught carries harmless cold. Another suggests a gap that needs packing. One animal call is ordinary. Another means something has gone wrong. You begin to smell weather, or think you can. Wet wood, coming snow, stale smoke, spoiling grain. The body learns the world by repetition until perception itself becomes more exact. Some scholars continue to wonder whether frontier people experience this sharpening as skill burden or simply normal life unworthy of comment. Most likely, again, it was all three. We modern people are fond of praising resilience from a safe distance, preferably while seated. The people living it often called it Tuesday. You rise again and move toward the hearth. The fire is lower now than it was at the height of morning activity, though still steady. You add a piece of wood almost without looking. Your hands know the angle. Your eyes measure the spacing. Your body performs competence before your thoughts compose a sentence about it, and that perhaps is the clearest answer to what this kind of waking does. It sinks beneath language. It becomes the way you inhabit yourself, your sleep, your hunger, your hearing, your hands, your stance at the door, your pace across frozen ground, your patience with stubborn things, your instinct to check, mend, carry, prepare, all of it is altered by the repeated fact of rising before dawn, in a dark, freezing room and continuing anyway. Not heroically, not beautifully every time, sometimes grumbling, sometimes aching, sometimes with more reluctance than grace, but continuing. And when a life is built that way morning after morning, season after season, the body becomes a record of the place, a living archive of cold floors, stubborn fires, rough blankets, early chores, and hard-earned readiness. By then, the frontier is no longer merely where you live. It is something your muscles remember before you do. By now, the room that first greeted you like a punishment has become almost companionable, not soft. Never quite that. The frontier does not transform itself into comfort simply because you have endured it long enough, but the sharp edge has worn down. The freezing dark where you first opened your eyes has given way to a room slowly filled with light movement, smoke, heat, memory, and the steady evidence of ordinary survival. You stand near the hearth and look around as if seeing it properly for the first time. The walls are still rough. The floor is still uneven. The air still holds a trace of ash and damp wool and old timber. But now all of it seems less like a collection of hardships and more like a record. Every mark in the wood, every patched crack, every worn handle, every folded blanket, every blackened pot says the same thing in a different accent. People kept going here. That may be the real feeling of waking before dawn in a dark and freezing frontier room in 1812 America. Not romance. Not misery alone. Continuation. You woke cold because cabins lost heat quickly once the fire died down overnight. That is one of the plain facts of life in such homes. Even a well-built room could not keep winter fully at bay. So the first sensation of the morning was often not comfort but confrontation. Cold boards, cold breath, cold cloth, cold water. A hearth that had to be persuaded back to life before the room could feel human again. And yet the human part arrived. It arrived in the way your hands found the embers. In the way the first crack of kindling made the dark feel less complete. In the way clothing unpleasantly cold at first touch gradually became part of your own warmth. In the way a simple bowl of food carried steadiness into the body. In the way voices emerged quietly from blankets and corner adding companionship without making a performance of it. That may be what stays with you most. The lack of drama. No trumpets, no speeches, no one standing in the doorway announcing that civilization has triumphed over nature before breakfast. Just people doing what morning required because morning had arrived and there was no use being theatrical about it. A few feet from you, the fire gives a low, settling sound and shifts inward. You watch a log darken, split, and catch more fully. Even now, after everything, the room still organises itself around that centre. Hearth first, then people, then objects. It feels almost architectural, but emotional too. Warmth shapes behaviour, light shapes attention, fire shapes time. There are records from early American households showing just how central the hearth remained even as building styles changed across regions. It was kitchen heater, lamp workshop, social centre, and morning miracle all at once. Hard to improve on that really, though modern central heating does make a persuasive case. You look toward the bed, not inviting in quite the same way it was before dawn, but still holding the shape of the night. Blankets thrown back, mattress impressed by sleeping bodies. A place that was briefly your whole world when the room beyond it felt unbearable. Now it is only one piece of the morning story already receding, and the room itself has softened with light. That is the word for it, perhaps. Softened. Not through luxury, but through familiarity. The doorway is no longer a black outline, but a real threshold. The pegs along the wall hold real garments, not just hanging shadows. The bucket reflects a little brightness now. The floorboards show grain and wear instead of disappearing into gloom. Even the corners, still dim, no longer seem mysterious. The day has explained them. You hear movement outside. Not urgent, just life continuing. A chicken scratching. Someone crossing the yard. Wind touching the side of the cabin and moving on. All the sounds that earlier felt uncertain now sit in a pattern you recognise. The world has become legible. Some historians remain uncertain about how much later memory has softened frontier discomfort into something more manageable than it felt at the time. That question matters. People looking backward often polish endurance until it gleams. And yet, even allowing for that, there is no need to exaggerate this morning in order to respect it. The truth is sufficient. It was cold. It was hard. It was repetitive. It was also intimate, skillful, and full of quiet intelligence. You think of the small details. The banked ember surviving the night. The ice cracking under your fingers. The way leather shoes resisted your feet, then accepted them. The pork beginning to sizzle. The first pale change in the sky. The deer tracks at the edge of the clearing. The fence giving slightly, then holding one set right. The apple slice shared into smaller pieces. The hot stone near the hearth. The child stacking splints of wood with solemn care. None of these things would look important if laid out on a table as objects. But lived in sequence, they become the texture of an entire world. There is also the larger truth pressing quietly beneath all of it. This room is not floating alone in history. It stands in wartime America. It stands in a landscape being claimed contested, fenced, renamed, and argued over. It stands on ground that already held paths, memory, and meaning long before this cabin rose. That too is part of what it felt like to wake here, whether every person waking named it fully or not. The room was small. The history around it was not. One curious detail from the broader era lingers in your mind. People sometimes mark severe winters or memorable mornings by reference not to dates, but to sensations and incidents. The morning the bucket split. The dawn when the henhouse drifted nearly shut. The day the fire would not catch. Human beings are wonderfully consistent in this way. We build calendars out of inconvenience whenever official records seem too dull. You let one hand rest against the back of a chair, worn smooth by use. The wood is warmer now than it was hours ago. That tiny difference feels meaningful. It is proof that the room has changed because people acted inside it. Not entirely, not permanently. By tonight the cold will begin sneaking back again, and by another dawn someone will once more have to coax heat from ash and determination. But for this moment the room bears the imprint of care, Scholars still discuss whether frontier households experienced these repeated domestic routines as oppressive drudgery or as the necessary scaffolding of life and meaning. It was almost certainly both, depending on the day, the weather, the harvest, the health of the family, and the strength left in a person's back. Human beings are rarely given only one feeling at a time, despite how tidy books sometimes prefer to make us, and that is what brings the room into focus at last. It was not simply freezing, it was inhabited. It was not simply dark, it was waiting. It was not simply hard, it was known. You arrived before dawn to a place of cold floorboards, dead fire and silence thick enough to taste. You stand now in a room altered by flame, food, voices, labour and light. The change was not magical. It was made, piece by piece, breath by breath, hand by hand. That is the frontier in miniature. A life built not from one grand act, but from repeated small victories over discomfort, delay, uncertainty, and the endless sly return of cold. And now as the morning settles fully into day, the pace begins to loosen. The work has not vanished. It waits just outside and farther beyond. But here for a few moments longer the room holds. So you let your attention rest on the fire's quiet glow, on the softened grain of the floorboards, on the thin daylight spread across the wall, on the last drifting ribbon of smoke as it rises and disappears. And now the wind down begins. You stay where you are not because there is nowhere else to go, but because the room has finally stopped asking you to prove yourself. The cold has withdrawn to the edges. The light has grown gentle. The sounds around you are no longer demands, only reminders that the world continues at its own calm pace. You breathe in the faint scent of wood smoke and warm grain and old wool, and it feels softer now, almost familiar enough to lean against. The chair beside you, the blanket on the bed, the low murmur from outside, the steady pulse of the fire, each one seems to settle into place as if the whole room is exhaling after the long work of becoming morning. Nothing here is perfect, nothing here is easy, and still it is enough. Enough light, enough heat, enough shelter, enough quiet company, enough to let your thoughts grow slower, your shoulders unclench, your mind stop pacing the doorway. You look once more at the hearth, where the coals glow deeper than the flame red at the centre, softer at the edges. They do not hurry, they simply remain. And perhaps that is the final feeling of this place. Not triumph, not defeat. Just endurance made gentle for a little while. So the room grows still around you. The frost outside brightens and melts in patches. The smoke rises thinner now. The day moves outward, and you let yourself drift with the warmth that has finally found the boards, the walls, your hands, your breathing. The frontier room fades into quiet. The fire keeps watch. And you at last can rest, sweet dreams.